So good morning to everybody and welcome. It's great to see you all here and welcome to the second day of our Share National Conference on accessibility. You know, it's a really exciting time for us to look at this, and we know how challenging it is to give time up. We had a really great day yesterday for those of you who were able to join us. Lots of really thought-provoking sessions and some really good input from all our speakers, and I think we're looking forward to an equally impressive lineup for today. Our first session is on accessible cities, something I know many of the Socitm members are interested in, and later on we're going to be looking at some of the solutions to the accessibility challenges that we spoke about yesterday, and it's really nice as well that we'll have Rez and Naomi back from Love Language in the breaks doing some signing with us. I'm Tony Colson. I'm the Director of IT at Sense, the disability charity. I'm going to be sort of chairing today. So just a quick run through of our agenda on screen if you need it. I said we'll start with accessible cities, and then we're moving through a bit more of a technology focus today on some of the things that we spoke about yesterday. Just a quick reminder on the usual housekeeping options, please. If you can keep your microphones muted unless speaking, please make sure you use the chat feature for any questions you have, or raise your hand accordingly. We are trying to make the sessions as inclusive and as engaging as possible. If you haven't used them, you can turn on the closed captions in Teams. That's available under the more options, which is the three dots at the top of the menu. Also, if you want to keep a focus on particular speakers, you can pin them, so you can just right click over somebody's video and pin them, and you'll keep that person on screen then. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first session of this morning and hand over to Graham Neal from Smart Cities.
Excellent. Thanks, Tony. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session on accessible smart cities. So I'm Graham Neal. I'm editor of Smart Cities World. We are a title that looks at how cities are solving the variety of urban challenges that we all have. So technology and data, they're really central to a city's evolution to becoming truly smart. And this, as you know, has a huge opportunity to improve quality of life for people with disabilities. But it's something that also risks widening inequality if the right approach isn't taken. I'm very, very pleased we have a brilliant panel, I think, to kick today off. Joanna Wooten is a consultant and former director of the Business Disability Forum. She's currently chair of Transport for London's Independent Disability Advisory Group. Renee Perkins is founder and CEO of CityMass. Its mobility map platform uses machine learning to help disabled users discover places, find public transport that suits their needs. Finally, we have Faith Lagrange, who leads the local and regional government team of Microsoft UK. And they help public sector bodies use technology and digital transformation to improve their services for citizens. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the statistic that by 2050, almost 70% of the world's population will live in cities. The World Bank estimates that today 15% of the world's population experiences some form of disability. So it's really imperative that cities make themselves inclusive to all. So Joanna, to get us started, what do you think the main barriers are to cities being truly inclusive?
Hi everybody. It's an honour to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Joanna Wooten, and I've been asked what do I think the main barriers are to cities being truly inclusive. The reality is, it's about the interaction of technology with human behaviour and inclusive design. So I think there's no point in having great technology if lifts don't work. But technology can help lifts to work better, and technology can inform you when lifts are not working so you can plan a different route. So that is where, so you might be able to help people to plan their routes from their homes better. Technology is not going to help a pavement to be smoother, maybe. You need to know that the pavement will be smooth, but maybe they'll tell you when they're not. So I think that interplay of human behaviour and inclusive design is really important. And what a lot of disabled people need is information so they can plan and know where they're going and have alternatives when things go wrong. So, for instance, buses are a really good example. They're diversions. So that you're on the bus, you think you know where you're going, and then they're diverted, and that can be really stressful. If you're visually impaired, where are you going to be getting off? Where is the route going? So, if you're a wheelchair user, what are the best options for you on the new diverting route? And what you need is the information immediately, so you've got options that work for you. You might have a hidden disability, such as anxiety, and you want to go on a route which is not busy. And this is where technology can be really helpful, because you can get real-time information and go and actually go this way, it'll be a bit quieter. So I think that's all great. And I have to mention toilets. Toilets are really important for everybody. Nobody ever talks about them. So you need to know where the loos are. They need to be working. And if they're locked, staff need to let you in. So it's all very well for having smart technology, but if you've got a rude staff member who just makes you feel rubbish, that's not going to help your day. So I think smart cities are potentially brilliant because they can give you control and you can plan ahead. And I know that my panel members will have some really exciting insight to share on this. So I'll let Graham sort it out and hand over to them.
So I guess, Faith, from your perspective, given the work that you've been doing with local government, I mean, where are the barriers from your perspective? What are you seeing, I guess, as the obstacles?
Yeah, so I think probably knowledge of the opportunities that are out there. I mean, Joanna is of course absolutely right that there's probably a lot to do in terms of the actual physical infrastructure of cities to make it much more accessible, and that requires planning, and that requires money, that requires all of that additional support. So without even if you've got the most forward-thinking local authority really keen to try and drive this stuff, they actually need the funding and the support to be able to do that. And I think that is something that we should be looking at, particularly post-COVID, of how do we make sure that we really get our cities accessible. There has to be a focus on that physical infrastructure. When it comes to the technology side, I think some of the barriers are really around knowledge of what's out there, and actually knowledge of what's going to be most helpful. So, really making sure that you've got an incredibly inclusive group of people looking at accessibility requirements, rather than, and I would put myself in this category as well, enthusiastic, able-bodied people who want to help and think they've got some really good answers. So I think those are the things that kind of need to be considered.
And Renee, Joanna obviously talked about transport being a big area where there are huge obstacles to accessibility. I mean, from your perspective, I mean, given the work that CityMass has done, do you see transport as one of the main problems, or are there other barriers that you've seen in terms of making cities more accessible? Renee, I'm afraid you're on mute.
Apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, thanks.
Yeah, brilliant. So I was just saying that transportation is one of the basic human needs, right? You have living, you have mobility. Mobility is a mean to the end. You go from A to B to meet your friends, you go to appointments. So it's a very integral part of a human life, and to make it inclusive. And that's, I think all the audience here is aware of the statistics of 40 million and 1 billion people in the world and the aging population. And that's not in a niche, if you like, in the technology world. There's a lot of niche kind of calling, but I wouldn't as a niche. It's a huge amount of people that technology could possibly help if it's done right. Now, I just picking up transportation from Joanna, that there's a number of points has been mentioned in terms of the information, which correlate to what Faye was talking about, knowledge. Now, I think knowledge, information in the right time, in the hand, and being communicated the right way that people can consume. And that's the systematic technology. Now that is a complex system that you can involve in inclusive design from the beginning. When you think about, if you're coming to a technology solutions, how do you make sure that you may have picked one of the accessible needs, for example, one of the technology, but is there other technology, other kind of access needs that may be common across different types of disability? Possibly. So is that thought process from right at the beginning, from inclusive design, how to sort of, how to include the end users that your solutions are designed for, to from the beginning, before it goes to usability testing from a design perspective. Now, the other things I picked up from the two panelists is actually the sort of real-time information is necessary. Now, I think technology is great. And for example, if you are going to a normal station, is normally have lift access for wheelchair users, for example, and but at that time the lift is broken, but that information is not communicating in real time when the user is actually going on the journey. That's not useful either, and because that will prevent spontaneous, that kind of equitable transportations for people with different disabilities going. So I think from a technology perspective, if it's done right from the beginning, it's possible to include not just one type of disability, two type of disability, and given the adoptions and utilization of AI and machine learning, personalization could make possible, right? And people with disabilities, they're individuals as well, and it's complex in a way that's within one type of disability, there's different different needs, different degrees of disabilities as well. So I see technology has the capability and potentials to be personalized, that kind of experience for the individuals. But having said that, the journey is long, and 6 months on that journey, and it's complex. I tell you that the amount of things I'm pulling my hair when I'm brainstorming with my teams and trying to sort of, from the design perspective. So, and I think those are the points I would like to sort of elaborate on. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Sorry, Graham.
Oh, please, Joanna.
I was thinking it'd be nice to add a couple of things, practical examples in the now.
Please.
One really good app is called Viewer Surface. So and that's a really nice interplay between providing a surface and the need. If you are disabled, you're not able to fill up your car yourself with petrol, there's this app that you can use to find out if assistance is available at the petrol filling station near you. It then rings that petrol filling station. You check that there is somebody there. You get confirmation that there is somebody there, so you don't have a wasted journey. You then arrive at the petrol filling station and you do another notification, all done via your smartphone or a normal phone. If you don't have a smartphone, and it informs the person in the garage which fuel pump you're at. So before, people used to get very stressed, so they would have to try and park near the surface court to try and wave to them and try and get attention. And that's really difficult, particularly if you've got upper mobility or you toot the horn. And now you can be much more discreet. And you've got control over, and it's particularly helpful, I think, if you're going to a garage that you don't know. But what it does, it helps the garage to provide the disabled person with a customised surface, so they have control on both sides. But equally, if everybody's off sick for some reason, they've really got one person in the garage, they can say nobody's available that day for whatever reason. So it's a really nice example of enabling good surface but also control of the disabled person. I personally have benefited from things like Uber and so on, that you can order taxis, but there have been examples, and I think about organisations listening in, you ought to think about it. Do you tend to have a contract with one taxi company?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, are you able to order taxi in different ways? Because previously, often it would only be by the phone. So I could never order a taxi. I would have to ask colleagues to order a taxi for me. So that mitigates my ability to be independent. But often, organisations will say, well, you're not allowed to use any other type of taxi. So you need to think about your procurement processes, whether you are enabling people to make choices that work for them. And that, of course, comes back to making cities smarter, is that flexibility so that people can choose the system that will work best for them. Sorry, over to you, Graham.
No, not at all. I mean, you raise a really good point, I think, from my own experience covering the sector. You will see some companies come forward and talk about how user-friendly their technology is. But I think what some maybe don't realize is that it may be friendly to some users, but it isn't friendly to others. And I think that's important in terms of looking forward. It's vitally important that all of us really make sure accessibility built into cities and what they do. Faith, from your perspective, I guess both touching on the technology aspect, but also, I was interested in your thoughts on how we can make sure accessibility is built into what a city does.
So I think the first point I think I'd kind of like to make and sort of bring us back to actually is that we keep talking about cities, but this is much wider than cities. I know all of the stats sort of talk about the number of people that live in cities, the number of people that will live in cities, but I actually think COVID has potentially will change that anyway. I think we are feeling more people potentially moving out of cities. Perhaps you don't have to live in a city to work in certain ways anymore. I live myself in rural Scotland, and I can only imagine how much harder it is for somebody with disabilities, particularly kind of physical disabilities, to live here and understand how to get around. And I think it's really important that we don't ignore the fact that probably rural communities are less well served even than city-based communities in this way. And I think it's really important. And I know I've worked with Socitm for a long time, and many of my Socitm colleagues, we talk about place and place-based approach. Now that might well take into account the city, but it's also got to take into account people living more rurally and how they actually access some of these services, because there could be an even greater digital divide, and that really is a barrier to them being able to really take up that kind of technology, even when it's available. So I guess that's kind of the first point. And then when you think about making accessibility built in, I mean, that's kind of Microsoft's approach with everything. Any of our tools, we make sure that we are thinking about when we're developing teams, when we start developing, how could people with disabilities be able to utilize it, be able to get a rich experience. But I think the really important thing is to make sure that, and Joanna touched on the procurement, if you want it to be accessible, you've got to procure accessible. You've got to have that in your procurement process, is to make sure that you are detailing that there is scoring against accessibility criteria in what you're buying, and then it will become built in. I think the other thing is representation. I've said it before, it can't be procured by just people like me. It has to have a broad group of inclusive teams that can really advise on that. And I give a really good example around one of our partners, Soundscape, which is it's an app with a really kind of rich audio mixed reality to help people who are blind to be able to get around a city. But it isn't just a functional experience. It's not just about navigation. It's about pointing out beauty spots. It's about kind of pointing out where there's leisure, where things have changed. because we would think about functionally how to get around a city, but actually somebody who is blind wants to understand if their favorite coffee house has expanded or has moved, or, you know, that's really important as well. That's how we get around, and that's how we live. And the last thing I would say is ask for feedback and welcome criticism, because we are doing a lot of stuff here that's potentially new, and it won't always work and it won't always hit the mark. And if we're defensive about it when that is pointed out, then we will just shut down the conversation, and we won't get those really rich, inclusive experiences in all of our places that we live. So I think, you know, you have to actually actively ask for criticism and then be willing to act on it.
Yeah. I have to admit, as a journalist, constructive criticism is a huge part of the job. So I'm conscious, obviously, we only have a couple of minutes left. So Renee, obviously with CityMass, that's an example, I guess, of building an accessibility from the ground up. What advice would you give to other technology companies, or even to public sector bodies, to ensure that they make sure that technology is that accessible?
Those are very key questions, Graham. Especially, I tackled the second one first, in terms of the government procurement side of things. And I think there's always a struggle. The budget cuts in terms of, will the government's able to have a broad team of inclusive members when they come into the procurement process? The practical terms of things, would they be able to sort of go through? I'm literally going through a project at the moment, working with a local government, and there's when we brainstorm how the project can go about, how can we do it from the design, from the ground up, have a focus group, understand the pain points, to all the way to formulate an idea and testing with them and reiterate, etc. All of this whole process of technology development, product development, if you like. It's a fine line between you're able to and you would like to, and it's always a life struggle within the reality. And I think only when there is this is a top agenda, this is a recognized pain points for local governments, that if they don't do that later, if they have to sort of comply, if you like, if you don't do that voluntarily and later there's compliance coming in, then there'll be much more cost. But again, this human natures of short-term versus long-term, all of this, it's really up to the government to really think longer term, as in the short term.
Exactly.
Short term.
And I guess with sorry, just to bring in Joanna, I guess one thing that's important as well is incorporating the opinion and feedback of disability groups. I think of cities like Chester in the UK, or Young Shopping in Sweden. They work very, very closely with disability groups from the inception of public projects. Sure, I guess in your view, that is critical to making cities successful.
I'd agree with that. It is important to include a range of disabled people, and not to assume that one visually impaired person represents every visually impaired person as well. So it is important to think about the spectrum. I think also you have to think about when you're including them. Are you including them as part of the procurement stage? You can think about getting your spec right. Are you including them in thinking about evaluating tenders? Or do you just tell them when you've bought it, when it's a bit late? And sometimes you're going to have to make a judgment call. And I also think you need to think about, if you're a large employer, and some people here will be with large employers, you're going to have a lot of disabled people in your workforce who could help you. You don't always have to go external. And you can use them as an initial starting point. You could then go external later. But if you're thinking smart, there are ways for doing things. You may have staff networks. Also, a lot of your employees will have family members with different impairments as well. So I think you can think laterally and creatively about how you get this input. yes, have formal panels as well. You have to think about paying and working with charities too. But you know, you've got resources on your doorstep often, use them.
Exactly. I mean, I think that, you know, cities really showcase the best of diversity, but in order to truly thrive, they need to be accessible for all. We could talk about this for hours. It's a fascinating area, but I'm afraid we're going to have to move on. I'd like to thank Joanna, Renee, and Faith. There's been some really excellent insight here, and I hope you've all learned from it. And obviously, thank you for joining us first thing.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Graham. Thank you to all the panel. There's not a great chance for questions. There's quite an active conversation going on the chat. If you are able to kind of join in on that, just a couple of the key themes before we move on. There's a lot of conversation about that element around place and, you know, what does that mean? We certainly talk about cities. There's some rural councils here who are kind of going, you know, don't forget about us. We don't want to be left behind from that equation as well. You know, Faith, you touched on the challenges of those things. And, you know, those points about representation and inclusivity have gone down really well. And, you know, it is something that we all need to be a bit more conscious of. So, yeah, my thanks to the panel for their sessions. And if you can stay and have a look at some of the conversations and answer them, that'll be great.
Okay, I hope you can all see my screen. As mentioned, I am from Danish Software, and I'm UK Country Manager for Danish Software. We normally reside in Aylesbury in London, but I'm calling out of the Kingdom of Denmark due to COVID-19 and so forth. I'll be assisted by Rob Griffith, who is Digital Service Team Leader from Wrexham County Borough Council. And we're going to talk about the program we have been running in January together with Socitm about how to make documents accessible or correcting documents. So we'll be picking up a little bit from where we left. There was a lengthy discussion yesterday morning about how to correct documents, and we will come back to that area today. But very quickly, I'll go through who we are, talk a little about the campaign, how to make a document compliant, key learnings from the program we have been running with a number of councils, and what has been the first-hand experience. Just very quickly, who we are. We are an experts in template management. We have worked in this area for the last 15, 20 years. We have 100 councils in this area working with template management, and also working with document accessibility based on Microsoft 365. Here you see on the right hand some of our councils, but we work very much within local, central government, universities, but also global organizations. We have, to take an example, the Equality Commission, also Northern Ireland, who's going to enforce the web content accessibility guidelines as one of our clients. And we have the Minister of Justice. And yeah, you can see for yourself. No reason to move on that. Talking about the campaign, we had a discussion with Socitm, who were aware of the fact that number of council, as we also heard yesterday, working on the document challenge. Many have been on the web content accessibility guideline journey, correcting the HTML part of the website, and there has been an endeavor to reduce the document uploaded on a website to an absolute minimum. A journey and an ambition that which makes a lot of sense. Nevertheless, it seemed that there were a need for tools that could help the documents, because it seems to be a mounting task. And we then reached out to a number of councils. Due to COVID-19, we had hoped to have more council involved in the program, but we're happy to say that we work closely with 3 councils, Wrexham Borough Council, Epsom Evil Council, and South Ayrshire, in order to test the solution that we are offering. We had a kickoff just before Christmas, and then we've been running all the way through to last week. What is it to make a document compliant? We discussed that yesterday, and there was several perspectives of what it takes to make documents compliant. But there is actually quite a number of things that needs to be in order. It's about the headline and the structure of the headlines. You always need to start the document with the headline 1, followed by headline 2. You cannot have headline 2 before headline 1. Images needs to be tagged up in the correct way, it needs to be described. The whole purpose, obviously, is for this guidelines legislation is to ensure that the screen readers can actually understand what is the website about. We need to tag up the links and the color contrast correctly. We need to check the tables. Working with many council in this area, we do experience that embedded tables in application forms and so forth can be quite a challenge. Because you are, for instance, not allowed to work with merge cells any longer. If you embed tables from Excel, it needs to be tagged up correctly. So in a way, you need to work according to how Office is intended to be used, instead of embedding all kind of elements into the document. If you embed an object from outside, from other source, picture, table, as I mentioned, and so forth, it needs to be tagged up correctly, and much more. So it's not that easy, and that was one of the reasons why we developed this tool, because we were approached by one of the very progressive councils in the Kingdom of Denmark, who likes to be in the forefront when it comes to accessibility, but also on the digital transformation journey. So they're kind of a leader in this space, you could say, in Denmark. And they said to us, we are council, and we would like to ensure that all our council workers can make documents accessible on their own and right at the source. That means that when you create an Excel file, when you create a PowerPoint, when you create a Word file, it needs to be accessible, and they would like their caseworkers to make document accessible on the go, so to speak. So they wanted to decentralize the workload out of the council rather than being dependent on super users or champions. They also wanted a cost-effective solution, and as we all know, they also wanted to reduce the change management effort and the need for education. So this was quite the criteria that were outlined. And why were we approached? Well, we were approached because we do work with the Microsoft Office suite. We are a close partner with Microsoft, and we have developed a template solution also based of text repository. So they saw you're kind of niche player and expert in this, so you must have a solution to this. And on this basis, we have developed a tool. And basically, the tool is embedded into the Microsoft Office suite via a button. And when you press the button, up comes a toolbox on the right-hand side, doing audits, locating where the issue is, and coming with suggestion on how to correct it. And then all you do when you have gone through the exercise working with the tool is you hit apply, and the document has been corrected, and you can save it as a PDF file if you wish to do so. We have put in significant effort in ensuring that it's intuitive to use. We hope we have met that. That was at least the objective. And if we look at the key learnings from the program we've been running together with Socitm and the mentioned councils, I'm happy to say that we do believe that we have managed to create a little piece of tool embedded in Office that is easy to use, that reduces the workload for employees. I think I can say with some confidence that they all feel that it has saved time for the participant councils. It's fairly easy to get started. You hardly need training. Working with them, and I think that also came out of was one of the lessons that came out of the program we've been running. And then it educates the users so they become aware of what needs to be corrected. And it's fairly easy to deploy. It can be deployed within minutes in principle. This was the key learnings I do believe came up. We would very much have liked also to show how many documents has been tagged up and how it has improved the index rating on SILTAG. But due to COVID-19 and the challenge we all are working on these days, we have had a focus on testing the tool, working with the tool, And then the Mention Council have had quite a number of other things to deal with. But nevertheless, we've had quite an interesting, fun journey together, and have had several sessions discussing very, very interesting documents, and have quite fun correcting those documents. But I can talk a lot about this. I think it makes more sense if hear from one of your peers. So I will hand over to Rob Griffith, Digital Service Team Leader from Wrexham County Borough Council. So over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Kim. Borough Pawb, as we say here in Wales. Now, that is hello, everyone, just in case, because obviously the closed captions don't pick up Welsh. Welsh is one of those languages which is not yet recognised. That's a whole different problem. I think that was discussed yesterday, but we're not here to talk about speech recognition. So just to give you a quick overview about who I am and where Wrexham is. Wrexham is in northeast Wales. We're right next to Chester on the Welsh-English border. Wrexham Council has about 3,000 employees, 135,000 residents. And being in Wales, one of the things that we also have to adhere to is the Welsh language and being Welsh language compliant. My responsibilities here in Wrexham are basically everything to do with digital, from the website, intranet, apps, and creating social media platform sites and pages, etc. Our goal in terms of working on the website and everything digital is to ensure we are fully compliant, both from a Welsh language and accessibility perspective. And we want to make sure we do things digital first, mobile first, so that we're building things now, as I'm sure everybody else is on this webinar, doing it in HTML5, mobile first. And we started with a whole new website, and we looked through realizing that we couldn't just migrate all of our content as is, and certainly not all our documents, in order to meet the accessibility guidelines. So that's when we started looking at PDFs and realized that realistically we could say all new PDFs would have to hit the standards, but we couldn't really migrate all of the old content. So moving on to the next slide, this will take us through to our challenge. It's like for everyone else, accessibility is an absolute given. We must adhere to accessibility standards, not least for the fact that it improves our website for everyone. It is huge, and it's certainly daunting. And unfortunately, in Wrexham, accessibility is often seen as a web team problem. It is the thing that the web team will sort out. The document is created, it's not compliant, it's our problem to fix that document. Now, we would, in an ideal world, we said, well, let's get rid of all documents for our new website. But the reality is we just can't get rid of documents. Documents are an essential part of local government. So we needed to take a smart approach to what we're going to do with the production of documents and the upload to our new website. So here's the approach we've taken. So we wanted to understand the guidelines, how they applied, and we read the guidelines as a team, and we also get input from people like him, from companies like Darniad, who can say, well, look, this is how we think this works, and actually that's really helpful sometimes to get somebody else's perspective to help you see something else. So we've learned about how we should apply the guidelines and what we needed to do, understand the implications for our platform. So as part of the procurement of a new CMS, we made sure that accessibility was right at the top of that, as well as the Welsh language compliance. So we acquired the relevant technology to support us. We've deployed it. We've offered training to our staff on what they need to do. I mean, we control the rollout of content through centralized content rather than decentralized, which helps enormously because it stops people doing stupid things. And we aim to continuously improve. Now, the one thing I would say is Dania, to us, the accessibility fixer came in later in the day, and it would have been really helpful to have known about it at the start, because it is a tool that has made a big difference in terms of how regular users can make a difference in creating their own documents, because we've had a lot of people struggling to understand how to make their Word documents accessible. So from our perspective, this has just helped make things a little bit easier to follow. So now that is a very quick canter through our journey. Now I have left some time so that if you have questions, we can answer those together. But basically, it's an ongoing challenge for us always, and it's we being in Wales, we probably all sound very similar, saying about it's always difficult because we have the Welsh language issue, but it is a dramatic difference in so much as it is literally we have an English and Welsh version of everything. So you imagine how much work you guys have to put in. We have to do it twice. So it's just, it is a painful journey sometimes. So all the tools that we can find that help us do this, it's essential.
Super. So I think we've got a question coming from Martin Robb. It says, how did you deal with the business case for adopting Dania's solution?
That's something we're still working through. So we've got a number of users using it at the moment. What we're aiming to do is to procure it for the whole organization. So it hasn't been rolled out across the whole organization yet. It's as part of this that we're doing a sort of effectively a pilot. So the idea would be to embed it in the organization because it makes it a lot easier than trying to explain talking somebody through how to use other tools that are inbuilt within existing applications, which are not necessarily always giving you useful feedback on how to fix accessibility. My colleagues spend a lot of time fixing things which actually in the end are not really helping improve accessibility.
Okay. A couple of other things coming in now. I think certainly we've got Kerry from one of the other Welsh authorities would like a chat about the CMS. And just a couple of questions around the website. So Kevin asks, how much is about converting to HTML rather than PDF Word? And in a similar kind of vein, David asks, does the web team have the final check before those documents kind of go out? So kind of a two-parter there for you.
Indeed. We have tried to remove as many documents as possible from our website. So we've gone from a point of where we would be made because to upload a document because somebody says it's important. Whereas with a new website, we were able to take the stand of this is a poster that tells you to go on the website. Therefore, we're not putting on our website. Which I know that sounds really stupid, but when you have somebody shouting at you, telling you that the senior director or the chief exec says this is a critical document, sometimes you just do it because it's just not worth the battle. Whereas with the new website, we've been able to be very firm and restrict what's done. So with the majority of things, I'll put out as HTML, but where we have to have documents, they are often created, and we then have the last say as to whether they go up. But that last say at the moment is tricky because we are fixing things more than we're rejecting things. So we do spend a lot of time trying to fix stuff because it's often delivered at a point where we have to go live with this tomorrow because it's a critical thing. We're about to be audited. So yeah, absolutely.
And I can see, a few of the questions coming in, both around the documents and things. So hopefully you can kind of stay on and pick those up. And yeah, certainly I think the last one there from Neil, which a lot of people feel is, where does that responsibility for accessibility sit? And I know we spoke a lot about that yesterday, and I think my answer to that, Neil, would be it's everyone's responsibility, not an IT thing. And yeah, that's a battle many of us have from that point of view. thank you both ever so much for that really interesting thing. I know there'll be lots of people interested in that, particularly from the conversation yesterday around documents. I'm sure we'll have a very active conversation kind of going on. So yeah, thank you both.
What are we going to talk about today is how, well, public sector, but in general, of course, organizations can reap the benefits of securing their digital communication whilst making it accessible to all. And I think, well, especially in the second part, there is, of course, interest of the audience, but it's also where the challenge lies. Just introducing myself and then my colleague speakers. So I'm Rick, one of the founders of Ziver. So I'm from the Netherlands, so apologies for the accent. We are a secure digital communications company helping organizations to combine both secure and usable secure communication, typically email, file transfer, and that sort. But of course, for us, accessibility is very important. But today I will not be telling you just about digital communication in general. We've brought two experts, field experts, to prepare a Q&A session. The first one being Timon Van Der Hoesfeld. Timon, maybe if you can briefly introduce yourself and your background for the audience.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Hello from the other side of the North Sea. I am Timon. I'm working at Visio. Visio is the equivalent of the Royal National Institute of the Blind in the UK, so to say. So we are an organization that helps people with visual impairments in their daily life. And to give a little bit of overview, we have around 2,750 people, professionals working at Visio. And one aspect of our business is to advise individual clients who are visually impaired about learning to use digital tools with assistive technology. That is where Lisa and I come in, also like advising about how well is a product accessible and what can we advise companies and organizations to do about accessibility and making their technology work for everyone.
Thanks, Timon. And we'll continue talking more about Visio in the Q&A session. But the second speaker being Lisa. Lisa, if you can unmute and also give your background briefly to the audience.
Yes, good morning. I'm Lisa van der Meij. I'm a functional IT manager, also working for Visio. And one of the topics I do in my job is checking if applications that we use as an organization are accessible. Mostly I do this for our internal colleagues. We have several colleagues within the organization that are visually impaired. So it's important that our tools are accessible, of course. And sometimes, as in this case, this also overlaps with accessibility for our clients. Because in this case, we use the tool for Ziver to communicate safely with our clients. So it has to be accessible both from our perspective, from our colleagues who are visually impaired perspective, as well as our clients, of course. So I often work together with Timon to test the applications and to advise organizations how they can improve accessibility.
Yes, thanks, Lisa. And I think you've also already mentioned, well, not the magic word, but the security. And I think that is typically where the friction lies between making something very secure while usable. So let me spend a couple of minutes on setting the scene for the audience to understand better why security and accessibility is something that we will be talking about in the second half of this meeting. Because what probably everybody recognized is that since the last year, COVID has accelerated digital communication enormously, but you see that security was typically left behind. And then what about accessibility? And that is, of course, where the experts come into play. But maybe to exemplify this statement, some numbers, and I think we all have the feeling about rushing to digital communication, but putting into numbers, in Q2 2020, over 300 million people were active daily in Zoom meetings. Microsoft Teams in Q2 2020 saw a growth of almost 900% of the use of Microsoft Teams. And for us, our digital communication platform, Insecure Email, in this case, we saw an organic growth of over 60% in the use of email to communicate with the outside world. So in a year, a change that rarely happens in a decade, let alone in a year. But you do see that in a typical company, that results in a dispersion of different tools. So some people keep on using email, but then it's not secure enough. So some people want to protect it with a zip file with a password on top of it. Some people don't dare to transform to digital and still send out letters. Some people use free file transfer tools, others use WhatsApp or other customer chat tools. But then you typically see another stakeholder inside the same organization, well, using a different set of tools for almost the same use cases, but not exactly the same. So the rushing, because business continuity was typically more important than security and then accessibility, has resulted in a dispersion of tools used in a typical organization. However, that is also a big challenge because at the same time, data leaks are on the rise. On the right, you see the number of data leaks reported on a yearly basis to the ICO. Maybe for the audience, so the country where the rest of the speakers and myself come from, the Netherlands, we are the #2 country in the most reported data leaks in Europe. The #1 is Germany, 77,000 reported data leaks since GDPR. We as the Netherlands have 70,000 reported data leaks since GDPR. UK is around 45,000 data leaks reported since GDPR. In 1 year, it's around 14,000. But typically people think of a hacker or a phisher being the threat. But if you look at reported causes of data leaks, you actually see that the vast majority of data leaks, namely over 80% of all the reported data leaks, and this is across geos, of course not related to the UK, across Europe, across the world, over 80% of all the data leaks are actually caused by employees inside organizations making a mistake. So the biggest one being a misaddressed email, sending something to the wrong Timon, for example, or sending an attachment containing sensitive information you were not aware of, which was unintended, or putting people in the CC that should have been put in the BCC because you would expose their status on being on a specific list. Loss of USB stick, use of weak passwords. And that is, of course, where accessibility also plays an enormous part, or usability in general, of which accessibility is an important area. So typically you see that security was focused on keeping out hackers and less on helping your employees make better decisions and enabling them adopt the digital communication tools in a secure way, let alone for people that are visually impaired or that are disabled. But because of those increased risks, people say, okay, but the tools that you probably used for digital communication in the past, let's say normal email, for example, security and risk management leaders must really ensure that their existing solutions remain appropriate for a changing landscape. And in this case, it's Gartner calling out to those leaders, but you can, well, most of the authorities call out to councils, to central governments, to hospitals, to understand that the digital communication they have been using in the past is probably not suited for the changing landscape that we are currently seeing accelerated by COVID. And that is where I want to make the bridge towards Visio, a royal Visio, as translated into in the Netherlands. Because Timon already gave a brief introduction about Visio, but it is an organization that provides advice and education, rehabilitation, work and housing to citizens, to clients, which some or most are disabled or visually impaired. And of course, with those digital communication shifts because of COVID, they were in need for digital communication solutions that were accessible to all. We're now going to start a small Q&A where I will ask questions to Timon and to Lisa about their experience in this transformation from an accessibility standpoint. For the audience, if there is any question that you have for Timon, to Lisa, feel free to leave them in the chat. I will try to blend them in my Q&A. Hopefully, because of course this should be about discussing topics and answering your questions. But let me then kick off, Timon and Lisa. Maybe to start with Timon. So I've talked about rushing into digital communication. Probably you recognize that from your company, your clients too.
Yeah.
But can you share with us, for example, what then the impact typically is for your colleagues and your clients with that rushing into digital communication? What are symptoms that you have seen in the last year that maybe the bigger audience doesn't understand if you're not disabled or visually impaired?
Yeah, great question. Well, yeah, well, like everyone knows, during the start of COVID, everyone had to turn to all kinds of digital tools. Yeah, we are really a fan of digital tools because of the accessibility of many tools. It is possible with digital tools to have your own settings like high contrast or text-to-speech output with a screen reader or bigger text size, for instance. So that is really great. But during COVID, we were also confronted with the fact that there are so many tools with their own UX, like their own user experience, their own hotkeys, their own design. And then that is really sometimes a hurdle for people, like really getting to know that tool, and in a hurry. It's also very difficult, of course. On a day, Lisa, you mentioned it earlier. You had to switch from Zoom to Teams to Verbi to Google Meet, etc. So that's really, that's really a hurdle sometimes. And of course, we have the technical accessibility on one end. Is it accessible, the tool? And on the other hand, we see the hurdle of the UX sometimes. But that's the main thing we've learned during COVID, and we already knew it, but yeah, we were confronted again, so to say, with that fact.
Yes, and also the speed of the introduction of a new tool. There is always a learning curve, of course, for all users, but especially for users with visual impairment. We have to learn the layout and the hotkeys, as you mentioned. The quicker you introduce it, the more problems it causes.
Yeah, but because can you share an example for the audience on we're using Teams. What are things that you run into when you use Teams, switch to Zoom? Can you share a typical issue that you come across using these tools?
Somewhat different layout. How you move through the menus is different between Zoom and Teams. The hotkeys are very different between the different tools. There's no standardization in those hotkeys, so that makes navigating these tools quickly and easily quite difficult. Especially when you use them for the first time, and it takes a bit of time to get used to them. And if you switch to one tool and you use another tool not for a while, then it becomes more difficult when you have to switch back, because if you don't use a tool for a time, hotkeys they fade away. All kinds of tricks that you learned to navigate through the tool that fade away. So that's a main problem. Standardization is or the lack of standardization is a main problem.
Yeah, interesting. Because indeed, you would say for something like video, you have a couple of hotkey mute, unmute, camera on, camera off, where you expect somebody to be able to provide some standardization there. But Timon, can you give some examples maybe of where accessibility has gone wrong in the last years, where a lot of tools were not as accessible as you would be hoping, resulting into day-to-day problems?
Yeah, I think on a technical level, there are many development tools to make an app, and not every development platform is even accessible. So you have, of course, native apps, you have Electron apps. Well, maybe it's too technical right now, but for instance, apps like Teams. It's an Electron app that's a native app, like something you install on your computer, but it's also a website. But it behaves like an application. So a screen reader, for instance, has to change its way of interacting Sometimes it's a bit of a native control, and sometimes it's a web control. And so if you don't know that whole setup, the layout Lisa already mentioned, that's on one hand difficult for users. And on a technical level, it's tricky. Like, okay, what is this element, and how does the screen reader know what to do with it? So that's, I think, a concrete example.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. But you guys decided, or your company decided, to look for a system for secure email, secure messaging towards with your clients. So what were you using before, and what made you decide to switch?
Well, before we used Ziffer, we used in Dutch zorgmail, and it's translated as health mail, so to say.
Yeah, I think it's similar to NHS mail.
Okay, yeah. And of course, before that, before the whole AVG, what is it called in
GDPR?
Yeah, GDPR, of course, yeah. I believe professional emailed all kinds of stuff, of course. And so we did a great job, I think, to really secure our emails and communication. Communication is very important for us. What I said, it is our tool to deliver the accessible formats to our clients. On paper, of course, we don't have many options, and in the digital space we have. You can adjust the text size, and you can put in high contrast mode, or you can give a format that is really accessible. And now we are using Ziffer, for instance, for the communication, and we have also our clients' platforms, secure platforms where clients can log in. So that's something that's new for us. The Ziffer tool is, I think, now that we use it for a half year now.
Okay, thanks. And maybe just for the audience, because what is difficult in finding a tool that allows you to communicate easily in an ad hoc way with your clients? Can you share some of your experiences with evaluating vendors for your audience, so to say, for your client base?
Yeah, Lisa, I think you were most involved in that process, I think.
Yes, of course, we had to look at the technical accessibility and usability, and we found some issues in both cases. Yes. Do you want should I share some examples or?
Yeah, and maybe because I think we should round up the Q&A part and move towards the end. But what is now typically lacking? Is it labels? So what is one of the first error that you typically see with those type of tools? What is missing?
In web-based applications, it's usually a lack of labels. And in usability terms, it's usually that there's a lot of noise, a lot of stuff that you don't need, and that only slows down your navigation of the application. And in not web-based applications, it's often just a general lack of technical accessibility. Being able to reach certain items with just a keyboard, for example, is a problem.
Yeah, well, so I think, well, everybody in this audience will recognize that, but maybe also the offering. So Timon and Lisa have a lot of experience with assessing tools. So if any of the audience, feel free to reach out in the chat to either of them to ask for help to include their expertise. But I hope this has shown how difficult it might be to find a tool to digitally communicate with both your colleagues and with the visually impaired. Tony, is there anything that you would like to say to move towards the end?
No, I think just say, it's been a really interesting session. I think that, for lots of us, COVID has changed that communication challenge. And I think, you hit the nail on the head early, how many of us have put things by the side to maintain business continuity over our normal considerations. And, how much now when people, I don't know what it's like in the Netherlands, and people talk about, going back to normal, but I think for a lot of us here, we think there is no going back, this is going to be a much
Exactly.
more mainstream, and use of digital has been really catapulted. But now is the time for us to think about, what have we been doing over the last 9-12 months that perhaps we hasn't been right, and to reset on those things. So no, really interesting session, and I think a really a lot of things to take away and think about. As I said, there'll be some questions in the chat, so please do pick up for those things.
Well, everybody, welcome back to BSL Bites Part 2. I want to thank you all for joining us again today. And for yesterday, for those who made it yesterday, welcome back. My name is Resane Waldeusis, and I'm going to be leading BSL Bites today with my co-director, Naomi Bottrell, who's also voicing over me at the moment. So yesterday we spoke about love language and love language live. And today we're going to be focusing on love learning. So it's all about the learning sign language side of the business. So I'm just going to check that Naomi can see me for accessibility reasons. Bear with me just 2 moments. Yeah, I'm all ready. Thank you, Res. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a little bit more about why we do what we do and who I am. So my motto in life is never give up hope. Everyone can succeed if you don't give up hope. My background is I come from Eritrea, and I arrived into the UK from Eritrea as a refugee in 2007. I'm from originally, my family all lived in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. But with the 1998 Eritrean and Ethiopian War, there was a repatriation movement of everybody who had Eritrean heritage to leave Ethiopia. It was a very difficult time. Everyone left their houses, their work, their businesses, and went back to Eritrea. It's a particularly difficult country to live in as a deaf person or a disabled person. It's a dictatorship-run government, and there's very little opportunities for deaf and disabled people. There's no human rights really for deaf and disabled people. No benefits. School actually finishes at age 5. So it's an impossible environment to live in as a deaf person in that country. And the reason I came to the UK was as a refugee because of persecution due to my disability. So when I got here, I then obviously set up Love Language, but I think the detail of that is probably for another talk on another day. But the message that does carry over is the message of hope and unstoppable hope, which is what we'll be sharing with you today through BSL Bites and Love Learning. Thank you, Rez. Phoebe, I'll hand over to you to translate, but thank you so much, Rez. That's a really, really great, always great to hear your story. And yeah, hopefully another time we can hear some more. So yeah, my name is Naomi. I'm the other co-director of Love Language and Love Learning with Rez. And similar to Rez, I've got my own why as to the reason behind why we do what we do and why I do it particularly. So I've been a qualified British Sign Language interpreter now for about 15 years, but my journey with sign language started 10 years before that. However, when I was at school, I really struggled at school. I'm dyslexic, and back then, dyslexia largely went unnoticed with no support. And as a largely visual kinesthetic learner, I think you might know where I'm going with this, when I found sign language just the year that I was leaving school, it became a really much needed lifeline, and education line for me. And I found that all the things that I missed at school or struggled with at school, I was actually being nurtured through the language itself. It had all the things that I was missing. It had a lot of the support that I needed, visual representation of language, which obviously then builds on things like memory, and it also builds on your knowledge and command of your first language as somebody with dyslexia. It builds your retention and your command really of a written language. So I've got my own personal relationship with sign language, which I've obviously shared with the deaf community as an interpreter. But the reason why I'm so passionate about Love Learning is because it really is a misconception that sign language is purely for deaf people. It's an incredible tool, an amazing language, and really the power of sign language is really yet to be unlocked. Not only does it obviously is the language of people who are deaf and choose that language, but it also supports people like myself, dyslexic people, or people with additional learning needs, but just generally everybody. It's an incredible tool and a communication tool too. So due to that, I do feel like I've got a duty to share it with other people, which is why we're so excited about Love Learning. Rez, if you just want to go through what we're going to do today. Rez is just saying, yeah, that's right, I'm happy to. So yesterday, obviously we talked about Love Language, Love Language and Love Language Live, which was the video, sign language video app. And today we're talking about Love Learning, deaf awareness, some facts. We'll go through some BSL bites, and then we'll hopefully have enough time for questions at the end.
Okay, great. I'm going to put the screen share on so everyone can see the next slide. So Love Learning is our new venture. It's a company that's going to be formed, or has been formed, sorry, with our friends over at the creative agency Outfly. And the purpose of Love Learning is to fuse together the teaching of sign language, British Sign Language, and English through extraordinarily designed digital and physical products that make learning of both sign language and English a breeze for deaf and hearing people in the classroom, but also of all ages. So you may wonder why it's such a big deal. Why is such an emphasis on this bilingualism? Well, what many people don't know is that sign language has a completely different word order and syntactic structure to English. So when you learn sign language, you actually need to learn a whole new set of grammar rules and not just the vocabulary. Sign language shares a word order with a lot of the Eastern languages, a word order called topic comment, while English uses subject, verb, object as our word order structure. So I'm just going to explain this quickly, and I might ask Evie to spotlight me after I just talk through it so people can have a look at the difference visually. So we've got a very simple English sentence here. The man walked over the bridge, and we've got a series of articles, nouns, adjectives, prepositions, etc. Well, actually, if we sign this in topic comment, the structure is completely different and almost reverse. It is bridge, person, walk over. Now, if I was to learn the signs and use the English structure, which is what the starting language is for many people learning sign, is to learn the vocabulary items and then pin them onto an English structure, we get something very, very different. Evie, would you mind spotlighting me? Can everyone see me? Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through that sentence. So we've got the English sentence. The man walks over the bridge. It's a really important sentence because it really demonstrates what's happening with translation, especially in places like schools for children who are just at the early stage of acquiring language. So what we've actually got is a sentence which means a man jumps in the air, lands, and a bridge appears in front of him. When what the sentence structure should be is your topic comment, obviously starting with a topic, your bridge comes first. It needs to be there in order to walk over. And your man walks over it. It's quite nice that we've got a non-gendered pronoun with men and women. It's just an added bonus, especially with the gender pronouns that are very popular at the moment. So we've already got that in place. We've got neutral pronouns. Thank you very much, Evie. Could you pop back to the slides? And I'll hand over to Rez for our next one. So the mission of Love Learning is to integrate deaf people and hearing people and really house inclusion from a very early age. So you might not know that 65% of deaf sign language users currently struggle with their literacy skills, and the average adult reading age is age 9. And that's largely because we don't have much in the way of bilingual education here in the UK. As a result, lots of deaf people find it very difficult to integrate into society, and things like academic or professional opportunities are limited. And as a result, people start to feel isolated, their self-confidence goes, and they're 4 times more likely to end up acquiring mental ill health, period. Thank you, Rez. So Love Learning will aim to create an equal platform where deaf children and hearing children can advance simultaneously in the classroom. It will be a catalyst of change to bring visual, kinesthetic and auditory learning into the forefront within the classroom, so that it will assist every child learning BSL and English simultaneously. It will also, as a byproduct, create friendships, inclusive networks to last a lifetime. So Love Learning will be set to be the go-to resource for bilingual sign language and English learning. It'll help schools to create inclusive classrooms, strengthen things like cognition and language acquisition for both deaf and hearing children. And then, as well, as we've mentioned, support and benefit children with additional learning needs. But it's not just for children, it's also for adults, and it's really due to bring some vibrancy into the adult learning sphere as well. Okay, thank you, Rez. That's it for our BSL awareness and deaf awareness sessions. So I'll hand over to Rez to start some of our BSL Bite sessions. Thank you. So yeah, BSL Bites yesterday. We went through the alphabet and we did it twice, but I'm going to play it once more in case we've got some new joiners today, and it will be a good reminder anyway for those who joined us yesterday. So I hope you enjoy it. Evie, if we could play, thank you. Okay, Thank you, Evie. I'm going to start doing some sign language teaching, so I'll make sure I'm spotlighted first so you can all see me. And Evie, let me know when that's ready. Thank you. Brilliant. Well, we're going to go through just a couple of things that we did yesterday. So we've got my name, Rez. My name is Rez, and this is my sign name, Rez. Just get my camera up a bit. Now, I'm just going to explain about sign names. So the reason this is my sign name is because being from Ethiopia, my first language is American Sign Language. So this is a mixture of the sign R, the American sign for R, and also the male the symbolism of any kind of male lexicon is the top of the head. So this is what I was given at school, so that's become my sign name. So also Naomi, I'd like to explain, or Naomi to explain her sign name, if it's okay to spotlight Naomi as well. Yeah, and can everyone see me? Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And also I have to apologize because I'm looking over this way, and it's due to this accessibility arrangement. So Hector mentioned yesterday that Microsoft are having an update soon, so we'll be able to look with only one screen, so that's really exciting. But yeah, forgive me for doing that. So yeah, so Rez, my sign is Naomi. And the reason this is my sign name is it represents something about my character. I'm really enthusiastic, and I actually think it was probably because I was so enthusiastic about learning sign when I found it at 16. So I quickly got given this name, which means enthusiastic. So that's stuck. And then also it'd be great to ask Phoebe to see what Phoebe's sign name is. Phoebe's an interpreter who's with us translating for Rez today. Can everybody see Phoebe? Or do we need to spotlight her?
Yes.
We can. Brilliant. Okay. So Phoebe, if you want to just tell us a little bit about your sign name and why it's being given to you.
Yeah, so my sign name is Phoebe, and it's quite simple really. It's because I've got a nose ring. If you can see it, a nose ring. As Naomi said, it's like often something about your character or your appearance, because deaf people are very visual, so they sort of catch things quite quickly, and then yeah, that's how you get your sign name. So yeah, mine's Phoebe.
Amazing. Thank you, Phoebe. Yeah, it's quite common, obviously, for deaf people to have a sign name. Obviously, we can't just, with hearing people, you can shout each other's name over a room. But it would be quite difficult to spell that over a room, so it's a bit easier to just create a sign name. It's quick, it's efficient, it becomes quite characteristic of somebody, and you can be given it. Or if you're quick with it, you can choose it yourself, and as you prefer, similar to Naomi as well. And because we're pushed for time, so I'm going to just skip over a couple of things. And first of all, I'm going to teach you the sign to say, "How are you?" How are you? So from two flat hands from your chest out into thumbs. How are you? I'm good. I'm good. Two thumbs out. I'm okay. I'm not bad. Not bad. I'm all right. And this is, I'm not good. I'm not good. Two small fingers out.
So this is the next one. Would you like an interpreter? And I'm just Naomi's telling Rez it's going a bit fast. So we've got please. Would you like a BSL interpreter? And we've got 3 minutes left, so we'll probably jump on from there. Okay, so moving on to super signs when you're ready, Evie.
Yeah, let me just get it up now.
Thank you. So we gave some super signs yesterday, and so these are some really good tips about why sign language is so good. So, for example, you can carry on having a conversation whilst you're eating. That doesn't slow us down. And also, could we have the wall one, please, Evie? Yeah. And also, you can speak through walls, speak through glass, which is particularly useful if you want to ask someone for a coffee when they're outside. And even better at the moment, especially with COVID-19, you can have a chat through someone's kitchen window. So I don't think we've got time for questions, but you can email them to us later on. So you'll be very welcome to get in touch.
I think we've probably got one, Naomi, that's come up. There's, you know, lots of positive comments there, but the one, and I've lost it in the list, but it was about differences, I think, between the American and the British Sign Language.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll let Rez answer that.
Yeah, so are there major differences between BSL, ASL and international, and are there others? So maybe just a quick one or 2 minutes if we can on that topic.
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure to. So yeah, lots of people think there's one sign language, and actually it's completely different. Even if everyone speaks English or living in a country that speaks English, it's still relative to where those people have grown up, what language they use, what language they develop there. And it's completely separate to the spoken language. There is an international version, as somebody said there, which is correct. And that's an amalgamation really of the languages that come together. So for example, two people come together, one from Germany, one from Japan, there'll be a mixture of those two languages, but also a heavy influence of iconicity within the language that's used. And there's quite a lot of American Sign Language used for some of the international signs too. But I hope that gives you a flavour.
Yes, no, that's really great. Thank you so much. And it's actually it's a shame with time. I know lots of people would love to have more time with you. So please do reach out in the chat, and if you're able to remain with us for the bit of the day, that'd be really good.
Oh, thank you so much. Rez is saying, yeah, we'll be very happy to answer any questions. So please feel free, take a screenshot, and yeah, reach out to us and we can have some conversations. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it.
That's great.
Right, so today myself and my colleague Lee Percox will be giving you a 30-minute workshop on the practical challenges of website accessibility. Just to explain the format for this today, firstly, I'm sure you're tired of hearing this now, but please keep yourself muted to start with. We do want people to join in. This is very much a two-way interactive session, but obviously if everyone unmutes themselves, it'll be crazy. So we'll raise questions. We've got about one question every 2 minutes to talk through. Some of those I'm sure will last a bit longer. Some of those may be a bit quicker. We'll display the question on screen and then we'll ask you to join in. So if you raise your hand, we can call on you. If you want, you can leave a comment. They are being monitored during this talk, but we'll kind of get you started with each question. So let's get started. So, and Lee, I'm just checking you're unmuted and you're still here.
Yeah, hi everybody.
That's Lee Percox, Socitm COO, and he's personally very familiar with the day-to-day challenges / nightmares of our customers managing their website accessibility. So, what would we say is the top challenge for making a website accessible? And we're kind of talking UK public sector here.
I assume if everyone's got an answer that they can pop it in the chat, but just to get started with one that I'm very much aware of, Oliver, is the challenge with getting on top of their PDFs. I'm not sure if you've got much. We'll address the elephant in the room straight from the bat. So I'm not sure if you've got anything you can add to that topic.
Well, I would say we could easily do 3 hours just on PDFs, but PDFs are enormously difficult. Mostly, I think, because the underlying technology makes it quite hard, and there is a lack of decent tools. So it's a real challenge for, I think, anyone, even people who have all the best support and training in the world. It's very hard. Let's have a look, by the way. Sorry, I don't think I can open up comments, can I? So, because I'm sharing my screen. So
yeah, we've got hand up from Kevin. So Kevin,
hi Kevin.
Unmute yourself.
Yep. Sorry, hopefully you can hear me. I would say the biggest challenge that I see is that we lack the skills in the marketplace. People don't actually know how to make stuff accessible. And I cut that across the entire digital sector. We've got some skills in some niche places, we've got some knowledge in some places, but broadly speaking, it's actually our awareness and knowledge of these things is pretty poor.
Okay, that's a good point.
And just to add to that, sorry, whilst you're with us, Kevin. So, how is it where you work? You are trying to bridge that education gap.
Sure. So there's a couple of things that I do. So one is I work with the Education and Outreach Working Group, which is part of the W3C, and who produce the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, as I'm sure you know, and creating material, training material, support material, background material that helps educate. So that's one of the things that I've been doing for a long time. The other is I'm part of the Scottish Government. We have a framework for digital marketing, which is predominantly websites, policy-based and campaign-based websites. So I've worked with all the agencies on that framework to try and build awareness and help them build skills. So they can come to me with questions and do come to me with questions, which I'll point them to resources that help out. And it's about building a dialogue with our suppliers so that they're actually kind of upskilling their workforce and very conscious and aware of what we expect of them now. The challenge is our expectations can't necessarily be articulated because you need the skills to be able to articulate them, and our skills are kind of low in the people that are doing the articulation.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. I think we should, because we've got so many questions to go through. Should we move on and then let's see what do we have? So next up, so have you ever used a screen reader or other assistive technology? So this kind of goes out to everyone on this call. I mean, I guess you can go a yes, no in the comments if you like. I'm just curious to see, firstly, what sort of representation we have here. But I think one of the reasons why this is so important is because in my experience, and I don't know how this compares with you, Lee, most people haven't. And it's a little bit like, imagine if you were making movies for a living, but you didn't watch movies. I'm like, I don't know how you would, I don't know how that would work, right? Like you simply couldn't craft something because you weren't involved in the outcome. And for most people, I think they experience websites on their one or their two devices, their phone and their computer, and that's it. And they never think about it any other way. So they have potentially limited empathy or understanding. I don't know, do we have any Any comments?
I think that fits, just to add to that fits back with similar to what Kevin's saying around the education, because it would be fantastic if there's a lot more material out there, a lot more guidance for everyone, but something that everyone can do themselves is install a screen reader, depending on which operating system or phone they're using. And if you start to understand a little bit more of these various different technologies that have to be used, it would probably change the way you approach some of the developments in the work that you do at the public sector organisation. So.
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
So a quick, if my adding up is quickly right, it looks to be about sort of somewhere between 70–80% of people are that have responded to saying yes, they have used the screen reader, but the bulk of those have been for probably a good chunk of those have been for testing purposes rather than maybe a mainstream element from that point of view.
For anyone that's saying no, I would strongly recommend after the sessions today, if you're on iPhone using VoiceOver, just get some experience. And I think on Android phones it's TalkBack. Is that correct, Oliver?
That's right.
Yeah, then definitely go and install them and get some familiarity with them. Obviously, desktop ones are great, but you can start off with those, I believe, free solutions on those phones to get started. And especially as more people navigate the web via mobile devices, it's probably the best place to start.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, let's move on. We have so many questions. How do you make your PDFs accessible? Well, this is a question we get asked a lot. I mean, it's partly a poll question, I guess. So, I mean, the most common methods we typically hear are we don't. That shouldn't be an answer, but it is an answer. Or perhaps it's more accurately trying to export an accessible document to start with. You know, so if you use Word, if you use InDesign, you try and export an accessible PDF and then you just leave it. And for some people, I think they use Acrobat, and then there's a range of other tools which are less common. So again, if people just want to leave like a comment and kind of just get a feel for what people are using, is there anyone here who's not using those kind of two main approaches, right? So not using Acrobat, not using like just exporting source documents. Are there any other tools you've used or you'd recommend?
If anyone wants to pop their hands up.
No. I mean, in my experience, I literally personally loathe on a fundamental level Acrobat. It actually makes me nauseous to even open it, never mind to use it. And yet it is still the least terrible option I have found. And I really, really, really wish it would go away. But unfortunately, it seems to be the best thing I've found so far.
With Oliver, with a lot of the customers that I work with, what has come up quite often is it's quite a bit down to your CMS provider and your developers of where they can help fix this problem, because naturally we want to try to move these PDFs and other documents to what Kevin says as bin them all and use HTML, which is quite optimistic there. But if you create in your CMS ways to make it easy to create a lot of these documents, have standard templates that have been built where people can drop them in and they can put little images in certain places, a bit of text in certain areas to which would cover, say, 70% of the PDFs that would be out there anyway, then, and you reduce that friction between getting it in and out easily to add that content, it can start to massively reduce the amount of PDFs you'll have out there. And also because of how search works and how people will search Google and other engines, Bing, etc., to find content, if you're building them straight into CMS with HTML-based pages in a way that anyone, content editors without technical experience, can work with, you can actually get more visibility over that content. So there's a lot of benefit, but it's really down to what your developers and your CMS provider can do to make it easier and not cause friction.
I think in a way, the best PDF is no PDF. The best way to make your accessible PDF, to make your PDFs accessible, is just to get rid of PDFs. So that's always a strategy. Okay, before we move on, did we have any answers to that, or?
We've got
a couple of things.
Tony.
I was going to say, so a couple of people saying, export from Word, fixing PDF. Kevin, yeah, obviously bin them all. Some people saying, yeah, export from InDesign and fix them. You may come to this. The question I was going to actually ask around this element, I know it's an area we're not great at Sense actually, is, you know, should we be making accessibility tools much more cost effective in their own rights? You know, one of the comments there was about Adobe and the features in Adobe. Now, obviously, you have to the cost of doing that. The Word element. This isn't about an ecosystem choice. It's inclusive and it's free. And obviously, there is, you know, there's consideration for that. To make this mainstream, should we have better tools?
I completely agree. Honestly, if I was Adobe, I would do it in a heartbeat. I just think purely as corporate social responsibility, if you want to use the horrible buzzword, it's just for the betterment of humanity, right? But I say that at the same time, I hate their application so much. I do wonder if it is for the betterment of mankind or they're protecting us all from its awfulness. So who knows? Preferably exporting from native formats gets you the best results. But often I've found when we're remediating PDFs, you still, ideally, you need to do extra work. Like a accessible Word document that is exported is not guaranteed to actually be an accessible PDF, despite what they tell you. It's pretty good. It's better than nothing, but it's not perfect. And most people don't have the time required to use something like Acrobat to really get into the weeds of making a PDF properly accessible. So I think, honestly, it's, yeah, it could do with Adobe or Microsoft or another company with some real financial muscle putting some help into it. I think that would be a really good thing. Let's move on. So another broad question, how do you educate your team about accessibility? That's an interesting one. I know, Lee, we could talk a little bit about how we do it at Silktide, but I'm kind of curious how, if indeed there is anything that you're educating your team about accessibility. So we obviously have standardized training. We make sure all of our staff have familiarity with certain practices and an appreciation of the consequences. And there's actually a certification process internally for us. But at your organizations, I mean, it depends, I guess, who's working on the websites. But do we have any specific comments on your approaches or the challenges you've had with that? I'll take the long silence as a no.
No.
Okay.
Stuart added a very valid point. Actually, it's not. He said it's not about educating the team; it's about educating the organisation, and that's actually true because you can have your team of developers, you can have your team of content writers, you can have your team of other members of the organisation that work across the board. But if it's not generally a mission from top down that are pushing this through, and they're also providing that guidance and standards of how you need to approach things, then it will end up as a bit of a free-for-all. I would be interested, Stuart, if you've got any points you can add on maybe what you guys do to to try to educate at an organisation level, or maybe you don't.
Hi there. Hope everybody can hear me. We have a constant problem sometimes of getting people to take it seriously enough, or despite us in the web team constantly going on about it, we're gradually getting there, but it is a long-winded process, unfortunately, and it's not always seen as the most essential thing to do, even though it should be. And it's in a lot of cases as well, some of the stuff that people are doing aren't that difficult to fix, but they don't see it as an issue to fix, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does actually make sense.
I think it would. You say you're starting to get there, but what steps have you had to take? So I see this as the most fundamental issue out of all of them to solve. PDFs, yes, obviously that's an issue, but that's kind of a counterpoint that if you solve this and get the resources and time given, then obviously you can work on some of these other areas. So what have you done so far to try and be successful with this?
We've got set authors for the website, which are out in the services. So we have guidance, documentation, and notes for them. We also regularly moderate the pages before they go live. So if we see anything obvious, we pick it up and we contact them and let them know about it. But the problem is outside of that is when you start getting to the issue with especially with Word documents, we've got to do almost like a call to change, because we can't moderate all the Word documents that are out there, because obviously some might not go on the website, some might be emailed out to people. So it's we need to have that from the top down, really, but it's getting to that point of actually forcing it from the top down.
Okay. I'm not sure. Does anyone else have anything they can contribute to, similar to what Stuart was saying? Maybe you've had some success within your organisation getting larger buying towards the top.
Yeah, I think Bal's got the hand up.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Stuart was just saying. When I do a training session on the CMS, I send around links for all the resources I can find for WCAG, writing on the web, plain English campaign, all the standards, so that they get an awareness of the accessibility and usability guidelines before they come to the training session. But when it comes to Word documents, PDFs, a lot of users just don't see it as their job to do this. It's like, well, we've been given this, it's not part of my job to do it. We've always just sent it through before, so just put it up on the web. So then it lands on us in the web team to fix these documents and then convert them. So yes, it should be an organisational level. It should be somebody at the top driving accessibility and usability through the organisation.
Yeah, that's true. Go on, Oliver. Sorry.
I was going to say, I remember from Microsoft's talk yesterday, was it Hector, said how Microsoft had a cultural change when they appointed I believe it's deaf person to head up their accessibility and actually take it seriously. And I think they said that was a moment when that you could almost feel the ripples in the company, as it were, because the organization changed as a result, because having that leadership from the top, having someone actually advocate and say, no, I'm sorry, this is not just some nice to have, thing that you think you maybe pay attention to when someone's looking, but it's actually a core part of the expectation of working for our company. And obviously organization. I think that's really important. It's hard, of course, to just instill it. But yes, maybe there are ways. I think it's probably a combination of making the tools easier as well as because that would help, right? Like if Word and other applications continue to get more accessible, then it's easier for people to learn and how to use them. Whereas if someone has to take a, say, 3-day seminar in how to use Word, they're just not going to retain that information. So it's interesting. I think part of the education is using the right tools and processes that are possible and practical for someone to implement and to be educated on. I think that's another part of the challenge. But yes, okay, that was a really good one. Let's move on because we've only got so much time, really, about 10 minutes. So who has had a website report from GDS? We know we've seen a number from our customers. So I don't know if anyone here has anything they want to share. We're familiar with the format. We're familiar with the, generally what they cover. Typically a few pages. There's, apart from some sort of brief boilerplate stuff, of course, there's usually a kind of like a table of specific issues that come up from manual testing and automated testing. To the best of our knowledge, that's what they're doing. But yeah, who here has had any of those and is willing to share?
No, any hands up.
Yes. No. Okay. Well, if we don't have anyone, that's fine. We're not obviously going to go through a specific example from someone named. So it's probably best to just move past this question. Okay. Do you feel you have the support you need to be accessible? Well, it feels like to some extent we just had that question 5 times over. But yes, what kind of support would you feel you need to have, and where is it lacking? What, if anything, can you do to improve that? Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
I think to lean on to, so Tony put a comment a little while ago on the last question, but I think it's actually relevant here in terms of they're trying to get champions in their teams who can push forward the mission of accessibility, and along with creating these accessible templates. So Tony, I'm not sure if you're able to shed any light on this particular question. Maybe you use your champions to push this forward and get support.
We do, and I think you know, we're a disability charity, so you would hope it would be a very high topic on the agenda. But I think some of actually what happens with that, and some of the things I'm reflecting on over the last 2 days, are actually we probably make some assumptions about that capability internally as an organisation, which is creates a slightly different view. And I said, yes, we do have a number of ways in which accessibility is picked up and is perhaps more prominent. So it is spread across the organisation rather than being singular in our web team. So yes, they do bits. Our brand team, our internal documents are all checked for accessibility by them. So, you know, if you're using those things, you should be covered. And then we have, I think it is around a dozen champions across the organisation in various bits and pieces. You know, there's a member of the IT team in that space. There's L&D. There's various other elements. All of our internal L&D, because we're predominantly dealt with deafblind individuals, we deal with lots of things that way. But there isn't a group that probably looks at it, and actually that's maybe a piece that's missing. And so I don't think it's, for us, it's a question of lack of support. I think it's probably a lack of coordination. But I think looking at some of the comments, both on the last two questions, certainly, you know, Stuart saying, yeah, there's a definite lack of support for things around it from that point of view. I'd be interested perhaps on Kevin's view on this. I know Kevin has picked up a new role with Socitm around accessibility. So yeah, Kevin, what's your experience?
Yeah, I think what caught me there was you said lack of coordination, and I don't think this is I think there's a large organization problem. Large organizations are difficult to kind of get moving in the right way. I think there's also, I mean, there's a lot tied up within this. I think there's lack of skills, there's lack of knowledge that this is a thing that we need to be doing. There's realistically, there's a pile of other stuff that we have on our plates for people to deal with. Throwing in something else just becomes more of a challenge. How do we make it easier for people to do that? So I think there is a lack of investment to a certain extent. We've had the Disability Discrimination Act since 1995, 30 years or what, I can't remember. Sorry, my memory's rubbish. We've had that for a long time. We're supposed to be doing this stuff for a long time, and we haven't. We get a new bit of legislation that comes out every so often that says we have to do this thing. Same thing that we've been told all along. So I think we don't invest in it in the same way, and we don't think of it in the same way. I often get arguments with cybersecurity colleagues and data protection, data privacy colleagues, and they trump accessibility, but they have the same circumstance. They've got a horizontal aspect of a service development that applies in lots and lots of different ways, but they seem to trump accessibility every single time. Why is that? It's kind of the way that we invest both in our development of our culture, our awareness and understanding of what the challenge is, and our willingness to basically go, no, we've got to do this. We can't not do this. And I've seen in the last sort of 5 years, maybe, I've seen that change. We are getting more kind of conscientious that we have to do this stuff. What we need to do now is become more organized, become better at procurement, become more aware of the little things that we do and embed it more effectively throughout our organizations.
So perhaps we need something a bit like we've got GDPR privacy by design. Maybe we need a kind of an accessibility by, sorry, privacy by default. It's accessibility by default as being something that's there.
Yeah,
just
possibly.
Conscious of time, guys. If you've got some other questions.
I really like that. I'm writing that down. I might steal that one from you, I'm afraid. Accessibility by default.
What I think, okay. just to add, oh, actually, sorry, you're getting on to this particular topic anyway, but just to roll back, similar to what you were just saying, I think that when you mention procurement, it leads quite well on to this next question of how do you handle the accessibility of third-party plugins or applications that you're using? When your procurement teams are going out there, are you trying to now enforce that these are accessible, or what are you doing as an organisation to get around that? I'll see if anyone pops any questions or raises their hands. One thing I would very quickly like to mention, I've spoken to a lot of a lot of councils, I'd say, recently, and they're starting to, in some instances, pull a little bit together to try to push back on using third-party plugins or messenger widgets, support widgets, that kind of stuff that aren't accessible, and forcing on the vendor themselves to either you make this accessible or we just don't procure from you, period. I'd just be interested if other people have taken a similar stance.
I mean, I will probably say I don't think we have looked at third-party plugins. Stuart.
Yeah, sorry. I find it a bit of pity that the regulations put the onus on us that we're at fault if a third parties breaches. I know we have to chase up on doing it, but it's a pity the regulation didn't cover that they themselves should be also making the stuff accessible. Surely, you know, I mean, they sell it to other private industries. It should be accessible across the board. It shouldn't be just about public sector. Personally, anyway.
I think that's the problem with the directive in general, though, isn't it? The directive only covers public sector, whereas taking in the United States, where although it's a little bit of a grayer area, what the Americans with Disabilities Act does or doesn't cover websites because it's a place of public domain, but naturally they're a lot more subject and open to lawsuits out there, which means private sector organisations take more of a buy-in and want to start moving towards making their solutions accessible. But we don't have that here that I'm aware of in the UK.
Yeah, that's right. There's not really the same kind of litigious, I can never say that word, culture. Thank goodness. But sorry.
I was going to say, and I think that's equally true. You know, technically, there's nothing for us as a charity that says we have to do it. It's our choice because, say, the regulation is publicly based, and some of that from the procurement point of view, and at the risk of some other issues, you know, that also needs to come down for commissioning of services as well. So, you know, when public sector organisations are commissioning from various organisations, either suppliers of private sector or third sector, about also checking these things, but there's work there needed to make that more than a box tick exercise. We'll go from there. We're probably going to have to wrap up in a moment.
No.
Kevin,
I'm going to say we could maybe do one more question. I don't know. Yeah. It's fine. Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick thing just on that procurement. I don't want to preempt it, but I'm going to talk about procurement afterwards and the challenge that faces us. I think what we can do, and I have seen in the past, is use your power and relationship with the supplier, even if they are somebody like Twitter, and get them to make changes. I did that when I was working on the Glasgow Commonwealth Games a few years back. We changed some social media plugins and made them more accessible, just because we were going, no, we want to use this, but we want to make it accessible. You can make changes. You just go to the organizations and start badgering them.
Have you seen, Mabel?
That's really inspiring, actually. Okay.
Yeah. It's also it's also a PR thing, isn't it? It's because at the same time, not only are you trying to enforce changes they may want to do, but it also will look quite negative on them if an organisation such as your own is coming forward, and even charities coming forward and holding them to account for this.
Yeah, I think it's quite inspiring. If you can get Twitter to change a feature, can we please get them to add an edit button? So I guess this is the last question. We've maybe got, well, -1 minute. So I was going to say, last of all, how do you manage your accessibility priorities? It's a real big challenge. There's almost always too much going on to handle. There's more than you could ever do, is the usual experience. Do you have any kind of rules of thumb or personal experience in deciding what you work on first, or how you decide what to tackle?
Stuart, you got your hand up on that one?
Sorry, that's more actually me forget to take the hand down from the last one, so apologies about that.
Okay, well, we are pretty much at the end, so unless anyone's got anything else, I guess we can stop here. Thank you very much, guys, for your time. I hope there was some useful takeaways from that. yeah, if you've got any other questions, feel free to send us an email or drop us a comment in the chat. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. So we're going to spend 15 to 20 minutes, hopefully, going through some background to the regulations, give you an example of somebody we've worked with recently. Broadly, our message is going to be, you can do this, and you know, it's all possible and it's all doable, just as much as delving into the detail of the schedule and other things. And also then look at your questions, and as much as possible, we'll cover every question we can today. But please do keep posing questions, because we will always circulate an FAQ after our events. So any questions that we answer will be recorded and mentioned, but also we will take any notes out of the chat and turn it to an FAQ and feed it back to you. So if you don't hear your answer, please do make sure you ask the question, and we'll set about doing that later, and I'll mention that as we go along. So we're going to look at the public sector accessibility regulations. A little bit of background there. We're going to play a little video which just captures some of the core details. But I think from your point of view, the questions would be, what am I required to do? What sort of timetable are we on? What are the next sort of milestones? Hopefully you have some knowledge of that, given that you're at an accessibility event and are therefore sort of express an interest in that. So we're not going to labour that huge amount, because it's really quite practical, quite quickly, really, what you're required to do. And then some of the common issues. There are other sessions about how you fix things, but really just to give you a snapshot of a couple of things that we see a lot, which maybe reassure you that you can get a lot done, rather than necessarily seeing this as a huge mountain that you've got to climb. And then Q&A. I'm going to be jumping back and forth just to see what questions are coming up between my slide deck and the Q&A in the meeting. So if there are any things that aren't clear or any questions that you have, please ask them. So I'd like to introduce Robin, my colleague Robin Christopherson. Robin, we're on to the slide about AbilityNet and then leading on to the legal issues that people face.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. Mark's telling me that because I can't see, so he's telling me which slide we've advanced onto. So thank you. So yeah, very briefly then, as Mark said, we want to keep this as brief as possible so that we can get on to the meat, which is you guys asking questions and hopefully getting some answers, or at least us being able to provide more in-depth answers later on. So very quickly about AbilityNet. So our kind of slogan, our mission statement is a digital world accessible to all, and that's absolutely the case. We are geared up. We are totally focused, particularly over the last 12 months, on helping to make people able to better use technology and better access services. So there are two areas of who AbilityNet are. That's services that we provide to disabled individuals or anyone with any kind of impairment at all. So we're a pan-disability charity. And we do assessments for people in the home. We've got a network of 300 volunteers across the UK. We do assessments in the workplace, in universities, etc. So we are what we would call a coalface organisation. We're not an organisation that is dealing with the hypothetical scenarios of accessibility and what digital inclusion means for people on a daily basis. And the other half of what we do is what we're going to be looking at today, which is the services that people access when they've got the right kit in their hands, configured in the right way. And I don't need to tell anyone on this call today how important that is, but we are going to go on to the next slide to very briefly touch upon the kind of carrots and sticks of accessibility. So on the next slide, we've got why does accessibility matter? And in a minute, I'm going to talk about why I personally don't actually like the term accessibility or feel like we should be thinking in those terms, but I'll explain what I mean in a moment. So you guys all know about the moral and legal case. The legal is why we're here today. The moral, I'm sure you're all on board with that. Even as far as recently as, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, we would get clients coming to us saying, you know, we're not sure if we have to do this, or, you know, we're not sure if we've got any disabled customers. We certainly don't know that we've got any disabled employees, for example. 95% of disabilities are invisible, by the way. And that's another whole presentation or discussion about why people are reluctant to disclose in recruitment and in the workplace. But I'm sure you guys are all on board with knowing that it's the right thing to do. But one thing we found very powerful to focus on in recent years is the very compelling business case. So you've got brand value, local authorities, government, public bodies need to have brands as well, and those brands need to have value. So I think that that's definitely, not an inappropriate idea to put across at the moment. They are your customers, they have paid for your services, and it's really important that they get a good feeling and good customer experience when they're accessing your services. At the very least, obviously, they need to be able to use the services, but if you can give them a good experience as well, then all the better. And that's certainly what accessibility offers. But from a kind of a hard-nosed business point of view, it's a no-brainer. In fact, I would argue that it should be table stakes today. And that's because we are living in a mobile-first world. On average, any given website, including yours, it's well over 60% from mobile on a daily basis. And so it is a mobile-first world. I'm sure you guys are, have spent time making sure that your pages and functionality are responsive. They work on different sized screens. You've probably got apps in the offing if you haven't got them already. So it's a proliferation of platforms, and every single one of your customers, every single one of your users is sliding up and down the scale of impairment on a daily, if not hourly basis. I would argue that every single one of you guys today have used your phone one-handed, and that's because we use our phones a lot, and sometimes we're just not using two hands. One hand might not be available, or we just choose to just use our thumb when we quickly type out that message or tap those buttons. Similarly, if there was sun, I don't know if it's a bright day today, but sun on a small sheet of shiny glass, etc., can really impede people's visibility, regardless of whether they've got a vision impairment or not. All of the things that the accessibility guidelines refer to and compel us to do around good choices of fonts, font styles, font sizes, color contrast, separation of tappable or clickable elements, keyboard focus. There are so many comparisons or parallels with people that are computing on the edge in noisy environments, in environments where their dexterity is impaired on a bumpy bus, or just using their thumb, or they've got big mutant sausage fingers, etc. There are so many reasons why every single one of your users requires the extreme usability that accessibility offers. The RNIB did some brilliant research recently, well, a few years ago now, where they got a lot of visually impaired people to test websites that just met single A, and they got some interesting results from that. But the most interesting finding was that a control group of testers who had no vision impairment, no impairments whatsoever, also tested the same websites with the same user journeys, and surprisingly, they were able, or maybe not surprisingly, they performed those tasks, they completed the tasks on average 35% more quickly. So you actually get a 35% usability bonus when you even meet single A for every single one of your users. Just think how usable the Uber app has to be for someone to be able to successfully book a ride home when they've had a really good night out, for example. That's the extreme usability that someone with a learning difficulty needs 24/7 to be able to complete that process, whatever that process might be online, without support. And that goes on to the last bit on this slide, which is about COVID. Everything has changed. I, as a blind person, no longer have a support worker nearby. That's a remote challenge for me now. A lot of people with learning difficulties, for example, may not have the support to hand. People with a physical impairment may not have that physical support to hand, etc., etc. Everything's gone digital. Every focus now of organizations is around digital, and you guys are on that page, I'm sure, and hopefully it's given you an idea of how important it is. And as I say, it should be table stakes to make sure that your products are fit for purpose and that everyone is going to find them easy to use. And to that end, we would like you to think about the term digital inclusion rather than accessibility, because accessibility has baggage. It's traditionally been this extra thing that you've done, extra work, maybe let's do it at the end before we go live. Anything that's a bolt-on activity can be dropped off when push comes to shove. So let's think about digital inclusion. And that's certainly going to be something that we'll come back to with the case study later on. And that you guys are actually being required to undergo now, this journey towards making it part of everyone's day job. And just like running a spell checker in Word, it's going to become something that will be muscle memory, hopefully, going forward, and everyone will be the better for it. If we
Robin,
quickly go on to the next slide.
I'm going to push on. The Equality Act obviously is one of the frameworks, but I think I'm just going to jump into the video just to keep us moving. So we've got a video we're going to play here. I'm hoping the sound will be fine. It has got subtitles. And it's got a very brief intro and overview of the regulations and the timelines associated with it.
In August 2018, a new law was passed that stands to make a huge and positive difference to the accessibility of public sector websites. The public sector bodies, websites and mobile applications accessibility regulations 2018 ensures that anyone who uses assistive technology, either through need or preference, or anyone who may have additional needs, which they could be permanent, temporary or situational, can easily access the services and information they need to. These regulations apply to extranets and intranets, mobile apps and downloadable documents. The introduction of these regulations has been gradual. By the 23rd of September 2019, any new websites or any website that's substantially revised after the 23rd of September 2018 will need to comply with the new regulations. From the 23rd of September 2019, any new content published on intranets will need to comply with the new regulations. From the 23rd of September 2020, existing websites still in use for delivering services will need to comply with the new regulations. And from the 22nd of June 2021, any mobile apps will need to comply with the regulations. Some content is exempt. Live audio and video and pre-recorded audio and video published before the 23rd of September 2020 is exempt. Maps are exempt, although if the map helps users find a service, you must provide directions in another way. Documents such as PDFs published before the 23rd of September 2018 are exempt, providing they are not essential for services and heritage collections. And third-party content that isn't under the organisation's control or hasn't been purchased for example, like buttons on social media, is also exempt. These regulations are not about coming after people, and although initially many institutions saw it as a challenge, as they started to get to grips with the requirement, the vast majority began to see it as an opportunity to ensure the investment in digital they've made was reaching the maximum audience. Now, it's all very well being told that you need to make things accessible, but how can you tell? The public sector body's accessibility regulations are based on a set of guidelines called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short. The guidelines are a set of internationally recognised standards for accessibility that ensure websites and documents work as expected, independent of technology platform, and have been developed by experts from all over the world to ensure all access needs are considered. The guidelines also provide testable success criteria required to reach accessibility at different levels. The public sector body's accessibility regulations 2018 require level AA. The guidelines, although not the most riveting of reads, do live by their own rules, and they are, in fairness, pretty accessible in terms of the guidance, reasoning and examples they give. There are 4 key principles of WCAG, forming the acronym POUR, P-O-U-R. P is for perceivable. Perception involves all our senses, and therefore when these are impaired in any way, content should be accessible through an alternative. If we cannot see the content, we should be able to hear it. If we cannot hear it, we should be able to see it. Haptic feedback with vibrations may also make content more accessible, and anyone who plays a console game may be aware of how crucial the vibrations of a controller can be to alerting you to things you may not see or hear on screen. O is for operable. This principle highlights that not everyone interacts with content or navigates websites using the same devices or in the same way. Designing content based on the assumption that everyone can use a mouse, for example, means you will be preventing some people from being able to access content and information. U is for understandable. This principle states that content should not confuse or be difficult to understand. Information should be clear and concise wherever possible, and should avoid the use of idioms and colloquialisms, unless they are necessary and in context. Although not a criteria of the current regulations, the use of inclusive language should also be something you can consider. R is for robust. This principle states that although it is not expected that the content you produce is accessible on every browser or platform ever created, you should avoid producing content that forces people to use a particular browser or platform, or a particular version of those browsers or platforms. This accessibility principle is also good practice in general, as sticking to a shared set of guidelines means that when a browser or platform is updated, your content is far more likely to remain accessible on the new version.
Great, thank you. We recorded that because we wanted to share it afterwards, as much as making sure it was concise. So just to be aware that we will share a link to that video. I think what we found generally is that those dates, they've been coming at us. We've been working on this for the last 2 or 3 years. They've been coming at us. There's one left, but the milestones all obviously triggered activity, and I think it can be difficult to get the whole picture, because sometimes you're just looking at the next milestone. So we will share that around. I think it's good to share it within teams as well for people who aren't clear about the legal framework, and also to introduce some of those more practical concerns. I'm going to very briefly tell you about a customer of ours who came to us last year, Darlington Borough Council. So they had actually done quite a lot of work on accessibility, but they were concerned. They'd been picked by the Home Office, the Cabinet Office accessibility pilot, and the Cabinet Office had flagged some issues that they hadn't picked up themselves, and so they wanted to know what they could do about that. Now, rather than go through the detail of the issues that came up, what we did was we did some user testing. So we took the testing that they'd been doing, automated testing of their own, and put some user testing over the top of it. And I think that's a good example of where it isn't just about looking at the code, it's looking at how easy things are to use, and whether you're adhering to those broad principles, the PAW principles, is it perceivable, operable, usable, or repeatable. So you've got that in mind when you're thinking of what users are trying to do with your services. The team, the Darlington team, got to see users actually trying to use their site, and again, we will bring in users with diverse needs, but any user using your site whilst you're watching can be hugely valuable to see, and the assumptions you've made about how they're going to click through things and then seeing what they actually do, of course, that's valuable as well. Now, what they said is that the issues that they found on the site were fairly straightforward to fix. So this is a quote from them. We found that user testing our most popular 4 or 5 services first was really helpful. So this isn't an exhaustive exercise for everything that you're doing. And it's saying whether you're doing user testing or automated testing or anything else, is you'll probably find that most of the issues will come up on, the first sweep of pages you do are going to get that 80-20 principle. You may need to keep digging to find other things in particular service areas that are unusual, but you're going to get a lot out of that first sweep. You've got a good mix of content, custom code, and third-party applications on those pages. So that's where some of the issues will be. So choose your pages quite carefully. And when we work with customers, a lot of the work we do at the beginning is to identify where we do the testing so that it's got the most value. And you can do that yourself just by looking across your sitemap and thinking about where you expect some of the issues to come from, or most popular pages. They're saying they targeted issues that affected a lot of pages first, logged them on a Kanban board, which is a project management tool that they were using, because that was particularly motivating to see them move from doing them to done onto deployed. And that's part of the process that we're encouraging people to really think through, is that this isn't a one-hit wonder. It can change. There's stuff that you can put on your site that you can fix today, and then somebody comes in another project and it gets updated or improved, or a plugin gets put in and suddenly it's got an issue in it that you hadn't picked up before. So just moving through processes and keeping tabs on them, your team will become more adept and recognize things more quickly. So Robin, I'm just going to leave you to mention a few accessibility issues. I'm interested in what sort of questions you have about the regulations, and particularly whether you're finding anything in particular challenging. We've got customers who are telling us a particular sort of scheduling, and the PDFs, for example, is going to be, we work with universities, PDFs inside their learning environments is an absolute nightmare for them, because they've got huge numbers of learning resources that have to be within the regulations, have to be made accessible, and that's a massive problem. You may have your own version of that, things you can see that are really going to be a big blocker for you. But Robin, can you briefly tell us about some of the key issues, because these really are real things that people are trying to fix, and they're not hugely complicated, I think.
Yeah, there are some low-hanging fruit, and there are some easy ways of making some, quick checks to see how things are. So tabbing through a web page is obviously a really important thing for someone like myself who only drives their computer from the keyboard. Also people with a motor difficulty for whom they haven't got the dexterity for a pointing device. So yeah, they would be keyboard users. People with smart TVs, a lot of people, particularly older people, might be browsing on a smart TV, arrowing through that content with the remote. They are a keyboard user. So check that you can see the highlighted link is always visible. There's a logical tabbing order through that, and please have a skip to content link at the top so that you don't have to tab 14 times through the nav on every page before you actually get to the links that are different from the page before. Color contrast. This is another one that you can check with a tool, and Darlington were predominantly using automated checking tools before they kind of saw the light and started to get some end users involved. And it's really good to leverage your internal, ERG resources as well to make sure that you can have that level of input to make sure that things are as accessible as possible, throughout the dev process. But being able to check color contrast isn't something you can do by eye. So the color contrast analyzer is one of the free tools that you can download. The ratio of the color contrast varies slightly depending on how big the heading is, for example, but that's a really easy one to check. Alternative text for me as a blind person is an absolute, game changer, and to be able to give people informative descriptions of images, and often a lot of graphical information or important information is provided graphically. So it's really, really important to either offer a text alternative, but give them a good brief summary in the alternative text of any image as well. Let's very quickly talk about an accessibility statement. Everyone that's heard about PS Bar knows that you have to have an accessibility statement. And it was, the first thing that people would come to us, because there's like a catch-22 in that, isn't there? In as much as you need to know how compliant you are before you can draft that compliant accessibility statement. So it's going to ask you to put in there, what is your level of compliance across the website? You can't fudge it, guys. If you're nowhere near even single A, just put it. The very fact that you have the accessibility statement with the things in it that people have asked, that they've asked for, is a mitigating factor. And the fact that you're going to be working towards it, which I'm sure you are, nibbling away, that's a very good mitigating process to have in place. So say where you are compliance-wise. Obviously, you need to know that. And then very clearly show the areas where you're not compliant. They need to be included as well. That will help people like myself not spend a lot of time becoming frustrated. We will pick up the phone or we will go for an alternative version. And that is where you need to give people the link to get help. So on that accessibility statement, there needs to be a clear link for how they can contact you guys to be able to get that alternative version or to seek help, whatever it might be. So those are the kind of key areas of what you'll need in your accessibility statement. There's no getting away from it, guys. There is active monitoring going on, and we hear from organizations all the time for whom it's suddenly sit up and kind of take notice time because they have been contacted by the Cabinet Office. And so, yeah, that's really, really important.
Great, thank you, Robin. I've got a couple of questions we're going to try and squeeze in to here. One specifically, I think this is something you know the answer to. Is it defined within the regulations that it is AA? I believe it is. I certainly said it on the video, and I've read that.
2.1 AA, please.
AA, isn't it? That you're going for WCAG 2.1 AA, and then then WCAG 3 and WCAG so on. It would be implied within the regulations. It's not labelled that way. It just says it would be AA or whatever the regulations are currently.
And obviously with mobile in June, there's an equivalent, for iOS and Android. There are accessibility guidelines you would need to comply with.
And this brings you on to the next question brilliantly. We are struggling to find a mechanism to test mobile iOS and Android apps for accessibility. Any advice on that?
Okay, if there is HTML involved, and a lot of apps are basically web apps in a wrapper, an app wrapper, then obviously you can do it that way. You do need to test. When we are doing iOS and Android testing, we can't get access to the code, so we test like an end user. So we change all the accessibility settings, see how the text resizes, see how it's reflected in dark mode or high contrast. run magnification, run voiceover over it, get end users involved. That's the key takeaway. But yeah, it's a much more practical approach because you haven't got access to the code.
Yeah. And this isn't, honestly, this isn't a direct advertisement, but we get asked a lot about that. And we run training about testing for mobile apps because it isn't as straightforward as a website, you know, because the HTML in your website is something you can test at code level. Because you can't see the code inside an app, you obviously do end up having to do a proxy. And users are often the best place to start because they'll find the most immediate issues.
Yeah, I mean, there are dev tools, so obviously the developers can see the code. So run the accessibility inspector in thingamabob on on the Mac when you're developing the Xcode, and similarly in Android. So run the accessibility checkers within the dev tools.
Actually, that's a good point. If you're making it in-house, if you've got access to the code in-house, then there's actually, that changes the answer completely, doesn't it? It's when you're using somebody else's app. Another question here about any tools that can help people check websites or documents for people who are using screen readers. It can be difficult to check that ourselves without knowing what to look for.
Yeah, I mean, in a browser, just use reader mode and see how things kind of read, albeit linearly. But yeah, NVDA, I would point people at. It's a free, very sophisticated screen reader. It's compatible with Chrome, Edge, Internet Explorer, Firefox. So you just run that over your pages. But you're right, there's a certain base level of knowledge that you'll need to know as to whether the issues that you are hearing are to do with lack of knowledge of the screen reader or an issue with the site. So yeah, we can provide more information on that.
I think this is a good point to say that what we've been looking at over the last couple of years, not just around public sector regulations, but generally with our working with clients, is you can take a lot of this knowledge in-house and build it into your teams. It is a capability question really for your organization and its teams. There are lots of tools out there. There's lots of alternatives. We get asked which are the best automated tools, for example, and they sort of depend what you're doing and how big your budget is and all those other sorts of things. They all do different strengths and weaknesses. But if in your team you're getting people who are beginning to ask these questions and begin to find out more and more about how they can do it themselves, a screen reader is a good example of the more you use a screen reader yourself to view your own content, the more you'll be inhabiting that sort of particular use case. And the tools are there for free, but you need to set aside a bit of time to play with them, get familiar with them, bring a real screen reader user into the equation at the start, because that will set the parameters for you. But I think people in your teams are interested in this as well. It's worth bearing in mind that this is more interesting than just bashing away at HTML, is thinking about how usable the pages are that you're creating, thinking about personas and use cases, sort of moves people away from just development, maybe more into UX type questions. So we're really keen to promote the idea that we can do it for you, but we really, really want you to be doing it for yourselves. I think that's a big message. And back to the regulations, our view of that is that they're very pragmatic, that they could have set a benchmark on day one and just said, right, after this date, what you're doing is illegal. But they haven't done that. What they've said is, if you take this progressive approach, you'll create an increasingly accessible service. And I think if you think about that internally with your own teams, where people aren't looking for checkboxes, they're looking for a change in how they do things. That's a core message that we're bringing back into those organizations we're working with. Invest in your people and their skills and their knowledge, and you'll find that those solutions are all out there somewhere. So thanks for that. I don't know if there's any last minute questions, anything else? I hope that was useful. I know you've got lots of other practical tips coming in other sessions, so we've sort of moved away from how to fix things and hopefully given you a picture of a piece of legislation which is really important, which is, as I say, quite pragmatic, and that is going to be increasingly something that you're going to see on your own radar. I think the Cabinet Office is now going around and doing inspections, and we see lists of sites and people doing all sorts of research. So it is something that will become higher and higher profile over the next year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
No, Mark and Robin, I really appreciate it, and some really useful and good information. And I agree in terms of the work that and what Cabinet Office are doing. And again, you've referenced there's many tools, and I know that the Cabinet Office are going around doing audits, and they're using a different tool. So again, this is where it puts even further complications on. I think a couple of points were made yesterday in terms of, the Cabinet Office themselves need to look at the website. As you know, everyone's website has to be done, but going around using a different tool is obviously going to create, complications. But yeah, once again, Mark, Robin, really appreciated and thank you for that session. Hopefully you're going to be staying around for the remainder of the session today. Obviously, if there's any further questions. And for everyone on this call, Lauren has kindly put the link back into the main session. So if everyone would like to go across to that main session, and we'll convene the event. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Robin.
Cheers.
Okay, I'm back again, and thank you for allowing me to run this session. We have, as I mentioned in the earlier keynote, been running a program with Socitm on how to use a tool like ours. And this session, the intention of this session was to discuss the areas of how to make document accessible. So we are in a way picking up from the last session, you could say. But actually the question I would like to raise is to the council is where are they on their accessible journey? Are there anybody who could bid in, and are all councils finished with doing the HTML? And are they now looking at the last piece of the puzzle, which could be documents? And how do you foresee that you will make your document accessible as the last piece of the puzzle, if that's the case? I don't know whether there's any questions being raised or any contributing here.
I think it's a question. We've got nothing in the chat yet.
Okay.
It's a continual process, but documents are next. So I think we had this on the previous session about people starting with web first, probably being the main strand.
Okay. I don't know how many are actually going to contribute in this session, because if it is, I could also make a demonstration of our tool, a practical demonstration, if that's of interest, just to illustrate how it works. Because if there's nobody really buying in or coming with this.
We're starting to get some things in now. So Kevin says it's starting in our outside customer base and then coming internal. So I don't know, Gavin, do you just want to kind of give us a bit more context to that, please? You might be on mute, Gavin.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was on mute. It's my first time today, Tony.
That's all right.
Yeah, we started our outside customer base, so that's like the people of the city. That's where we're looking for our accessibility journey to begin with. So everything that interfaces with our external customer base that we serve, that's where we started, and then we'll be coming into our internal customer base. And it's not like that. It's sort of, different bits start in different areas, but it's predominantly we're looking at serving the people first, and then our internal base comes like a second in priority list, if not, in what we're doing. So some of the things that we're doing as well is about super connected cities and intelligent cities. So with the design process of intelligent city is starting now, and how that talks to blue light vehicles, for example, and then we'll be moving on from there. So we're all at a ground floor, and we're just pushing into, instead of saying accessibility is a bolt-on, we're trying to move it so it becomes right in the core. So it's more about how do people use things, not an accessibility bolt-on. Hope that makes where we are on our accessibility journey a little bit more understandable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks.
Oh, no. Very interesting. What we do experience working with a number of council and also working with Hanover Council in Scandinavia, we have experienced that most councils tend to start with looking at the whole HTML part of the website, looking at the whole website and how it's been built up with the NIC and also external internet, and looking at and then addressing this. And as I also said in my keynote earlier today, I think it's a logical choice to say let's reduce the document size to an absolute minimum. However, what we experience and very much experience right now, working in the UK, we see the same phenomena as we see in Scandinavia, that there will be some documents that you cannot exclude. You may try to streamline them, shorten them down, make them more to the point, and you can also optimize them. So instead of having documents that to a large extent has been made in the past where there was where you more or less could do everything with your document, you can try to make them more comply with how the office guidelines in an accordance with the guidelines as such. But to get fully rid of all documents is probably, it's going to be difficult, we believe. Not that we don't respect the ambition, but it just seems to be the case, and we do see that to a large degree at the moment also from the requests we get for solution in order to solve these kind of challenges. But could I perhaps maybe have a more open question is how are you correcting documents nowadays? Because we see different ways to go around it. We see that some try to use supporting tools. It could be ours, it could be partly Microsoft, it could be others, InDesign, whatever. Some have also taken the choice actually to do it manually. We have come across a number of councils who have taken that route. They also quite openly say that it's a mountain task. It's a big job. It can be done. We've also spoken with universities in the UK where they have taken that route, to take an example. But it could be interesting to hear whether there are any feedbacks. What are the thoughts in this area? What are the school of thoughts? That's all.
Let people do their typing, I think.
Okay.
Gavin's got his hand up.
I thought I'd just pop in. We're using this as sort of the same way as we do security. So ground floor, it's much easier to start right at the very beginning doing this than at the end doing the correction on documents. But obviously when it's existing documents, you have to go back and correct those existing documents. So it's more I think a culture change on the correction of documents. So I mean our internal policies go into something called Policy Hub for then everybody to be able to read those policies. And right at the very beginning of implementing this, we decided, no, here's a template, and that's how you need to construct your document for everybody to read in a easy way. And so we created that right at the very get-go at the beginning to then influence. So all of the old policies, well, then it was down to our businesses to transpose those old policies into the new template. And we just became like a rubber stamp service to say, yeah, you've done it right. Well done. Congratulations. We can now promote that into something that can be produced for everybody to read. So we essentially became a hosting service and a verification service for policies rather than correcting the document. So we drew a line to say from this date, that's it. We're going to the new documentation, and you won't be hosted unless you toe the line and fill in the template. And majority of our users found that the templates were a lot easier to use than what they were using previously. What they were using previously was extremely busy and very complicated. our template suddenly becomes very simple, very easy, very direct, and that we can, increase text size. We can do a number of things to the document, but not change the integral feeling of the document. So that's how we did a very simple change for our internal policies. That was easy because that's something we control, that's not got a law requirement apart from you have it. However, when we're going to planning documents, that's a whole different ball game that has a lot of different people involved, and we have to tread on that very carefully because we've got a lot of legislation to comply to that's different than the accessibility, and those documents are historically, it goes back a number of years. There are some documents that we've got that go back to Agincourt,
No, but that is to respond to what you're saying. That's certainly what we experienced working with a number of council, that they have some documents that were made in the past when there were no guidelines. So there was no reason to follow the office structure, so to speak, and you could just embed Excel tables, you could embed pictures, you could more or less, there was free lunch, if I may say so. And now some council we experience are very much challenged with the fact that they have a 100 pages document that is quite essential, that needs to be uploaded, but it just needs to be redone. But I also think that the authorities are taking a practical approach to this and saying that they ask the councils to correct documents going forward, and the backlog of PDF, obviously it would be clearly correct to correct them, and it would clearly be better to correct all documents, so to speak. That's part of this is not just legislation, it's also about integrity, it's also about ensuring that, although we're talking about today, but I guess being on a journey, you need to start crawling before you start walking. And that's,
I mean, we have found some of the documents in the 70s are actually, if you compare that for accessibility, the format, the way they've been laid out, those documents comply. So it's not always a massive change. You look at your older documents, and those have been designed to be bullet pointed, easily read, clearly laid out, and those documents are just a matter of scan them in, put them up there because they comply, and they're very not busy. I think the more we get technology, the more busy things tend to be, because we have this need to flesh out the information that you're seeing and try and put it all in one place, rather than think about clearly laying out in your report. I honestly believe report writing is an art form that has sadly gone because we've moved on with technology. So we don't do that report writing again. Sorry, I'll stop speaking now.
No, I think it's fine. I was say there's maybe a question for you, Kim, but one of the ones that's coming up in the chat is, dealing with planning documents. That seems to be a particular challenge, and sometimes where they're created by external parties. And if we've got a couple of minutes on that at all, and your thoughts, maybe documents with a lot of diagrams in. Again, that was a lot of conversation yesterday around that.
Planning documents we come across, and we actually coach and try to support our clients in this matter, and coach them on how to go about it. And I see that Anne Jones has a question about external documents coming that's going to be uploaded, and I guess I cannot cover an answer. And say, I can say is that you need to be allowed by property the party to correct it so it is accessible, because it may be that the external party is a private company. They are not obliged, so to speak, to make it accessible according to legislation. It is public institutions who are obliged to do so. But I guess you have to, well, one way to go about it is to go back to them, push back and say, if you want to deliver to us, if you're going to be our partner going forward, you need to make your documents accessible, because otherwise we cannot upload it. So that would be, I would probably say that would be a reasonable stand to take if they are a collaborating partner, and if they want to collaborate with the council. So I don't think it's an unreasonable stand to take. Or the other way around is to say that thank you for the planning document. We obviously need to make it accessible. So based on this, you may see some changes in the document you have provided, but otherwise we cannot upload it. Concerning the documents, we work very much with the Office suite, and we know the nature and the guidelines and the rules on how to work with this correctly, how you structure a document with the table of content, with the right heading structure going from 1 to 2 to 3, how you tag up pictures and so forth. Having said that, you sometimes need to work a little bit of work around, and one could be that when you have graphs, one way to go about it is perhaps to embed it in as a picture in the document, and then tag the picture up describing the graphs. So what you do is you change the graph to a picture, and you describe in text what the picture says. So if it's graphs going from left to right and showing a development, age development, whatever it may be, then you describe actually what the graphs is telling you, so to speak, and text-wise. Thereby the screen readers can actually, when they read it, they're being read aloud what the graph is explaining. Another element we often see is that there is text placed beneath pictures in addition to the normal text. Here, one useful workaround can be to embed the text beneath the pictures into the normal text. This instead of having to tag up the text beneath the pictures all the time. We've come across documents where there's a lot of pictures, a lot of graph, and beneath each graph, beneath each picture, there's additional text in addition to the normal text. And there you have to work a little bit smarter, you could say, if I may use this word, by simply embed the text into the general text structure and take away the small text, because otherwise you need to tag it up. Another element is when you work with tables, try to avoid merge cells, work with the normal Microsoft table, which is in the Microsoft Office suite. Try not to embed Excel tables into the documents, because everything you embed from outside into the document needs to be tagged up correctly. Another tip you can use if you have complex elements into the document and you simply find it hard to play around, or you can group it and tag it up as a general picture and describe the picture where you describe what it's saying, because it is sometimes more or less impossible to simply forget all the details, communicate all the details. So you need to take a high level perspective on how can I communicate what we're trying to say here in a more to the point way. That's one of the tips and tricks we have tested that also with the authorities in Scandinavia and who works closely with you, and that has been accepted, so to speak. I hope I've answered as best as I can. There's no right or wrong here, so I'm trying to.
I think that's fine, and I think I'm sure it is a topic that we will carry on discussing. I think we set out yesterday. Sometimes there isn't so much an answer to this, but it is about how we perhaps respond and move forward.
So, really exciting topic of procurement. Quick thing, I am Kim White, Head of Digital Accessibility in the Scottish Government. So this is a short slide set and possibly a short presentation. I'm hoping to open up some discussion points later. So I'm priming everybody at the start to start thinking of questions and kind of pulling them together at the end and or dropping in the chat as we're going along. I think I've got a disclaimer in a moment, but just to talk roughly about the aims that I'm interested in exploring today. So accessibility, it's sometimes, not always, included as a non-functional requirement. It's included in our procurement activities. We've got mature digital accessibility standards. They exist. They've existed for a long time. They're constantly being developed. They're constantly being improved. You can have your views and thoughts on what you feel are good and bad about them and whether or not you can cause problems with them. But fundamentally, they're there. They're mature. We're good. So with that, why are we still ending up with so many programs that are inaccessible? Excuse me. And we do. I mean, the vast majority of the stuff that we produce, and I'm not just talking the public sector, I think this applies across the board in terms of digital, is inaccessible. And it's sad truth. I'm going to explore why I think this happens, or what I've seen that kind of leads to this within the realms of Scottish government, and also some of the things that I've been trying to do to address this. And it's not an easy problem, so don't expect mass miracle type things coming out of this one. There is a disclaimer within this, which is basically I've got way more questions than I have got answers. This is, as I say, not easy. So just a bit of a background on procurement within the Scottish Government, and there's probably similarities within your own organisations. We've got a number of different pathways to procurement. We can go down a quick quote. So if it's under a certain threshold, we can identify suitable, potentially suitable suppliers and take a quote direct to them. We've got a framework which is much more involved, and we put that out and people come in and tender. And then there's the UK government framework that we're part of. And then we've now got software as a service, where you're going out and buying a platform software. We've got cloud purchasing within that. We've got a value added reseller framework for that, where we basically go, I want that thing, and we can go off and buy it. We've got lots of different information and pathways into this. So we've got Public Contract Scotland, and there are Digital Scotland blogs, which kind of talk about the sort of procurement activities that are going on. There's NHS Scotland, a thing called Scotland Excel, which is a centre for procurement and expertise for the local government. And we've got a thing called the Dynamic Purchasing System, which is a kind of procurement sort of G-Cloud type thing within Scotland. So wide variety of approaches, wide variety of pathways. Most of them all require us to kind of pull together some form of requirement specification. What is it we're asking somebody to do for us? So we put out an invitation to tender. Within that invitation to tender, there's the full-on requirements. If it's a large system, then that's going to be very involved and quite detailed, and there's not going to be a lot of work within that. If it's something smaller or a smaller service, then it's going to be commensurately more straightforward or smaller. So within that, we need to specify our requirements. Now, this is where I think we start having a problem. And I've seen this in a number of requirement specifications that I've seen. So you might not have a specialist who's able to provide you with a suitable requirement. And you may end up with something like website must meet the WC3 deliberate accessibility standards. I have seen this. So this is someone who's kind of aware that accessibility is a thing, but has no idea what the standards are, has no idea what our public sector duties are, has got no idea who the organization is that's doing the standards, and subsequently we get poor specification. This is possibly a little bit on the extreme side of poor specification, but this is the sort of thing that can happen. If you have got an accessibility specialist to hand, you might get something much more involved and precise. So All digital interfaces, internal and external, and mobile apps must comply with all level A, AA success criteria of the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.1. Evidence of compliance must be provided. This is the standard that we're going to follow. You can then also put in, excuse me, you can then also add in must ensure your service works with assistive technologies. Specify what they are, and the GDS has a list of relatively up-to-date assistive technologies or common assistive technologies that are being used. You can use that as your baseline, not necessarily the full extent of what you want to do, but that can be quite useful as something there. So within this, you can specify this as a non-functional requirement, but you can also ask questions, but that leads to another problem. So, and also when you get into scoring questions. So if you're going to ask a question, it's like, how accessible is your product? You can ask the wrong question and you don't get meaningful information. So for example, you could ask, how well does your product support the needs of blind people? Now, okay, that's going to tell you something, but it's not necessarily saying this product is accessible. We know accessibility and disabled people are far more inclusive than just the sort of blind people. And we also know a lot more about that, so we can ask broader questions from that sort of thing. The other problem that you've got with this is, so even if you're asking the right questions, and I've got some kind of ideas of right questions, possible right questions in a bit, but even if you're asking right questions, who are you going to get to scrutinize the responses? And this is something else that I've seen. We get someone saying that they know a little bit about accessibility, or they're aware that it's an issue. So they put in, right, we want to make sure that you're WCAG 2.1 compliant and that your service works with XYZ assistive technologies. And all the suppliers respond, yes, of course it will. And the people scoring the tender go, great, they've said it will, that's great. And they've pointed us to this example, that's great, it looks accessible. But they've no idea, neither side necessarily have any idea what they are talking about. And that's not unreasonable. Accessibility is a specialist knowledge space. And it does require a lot of experience, a lot of practice, a lot of technical knowledge in order to be able to scrutinize a response thoroughly and be able to make an informed call on whether or not, bluntly put, the supplier's telling porkies. If there is something within there that isn't actually kind of accessible or clear or whatever, you're not necessarily going to find it if you don't have those specialists. So they need that. You need those specialists in order to be able to scrutinize responses. But it can be time consuming. I remember speaking to someone from Edinburgh University who was involved in doing equality impact assessments on all purchased products. And she was talking in the thousands in terms of purchasing choices that she needed to scrutinize. And within those thousands of purchasing choices, there were multiple submissions and multiple options. And there was absolutely no way she was going to be able to do that. She had a team of about 3 people, I think it was. So how do you deal with that as well? And the other thing problem that you've got with kind of these responses is it may not tell you anything other than intent. And that's a tricky one as well. So you can ask for evidence and so forth, and you might get some, you might not. But ultimately, particularly if you're kind of looking at developing a system or a service, you're looking for the supplier to be able to provide you with the skills that you want and make sure that whatever they are supplying is going to be accessible. But they can say all they like. If they can't evidence that they can deliver it, then what do you actually do? And this leads to another problem within the way that we score responses. And again, forgive me if this isn't how you do it, and that's maybe some of the questions that I've got, but we put in an ITT, an invitation to tender. We've got 40 odd questions within there, and we apply percentages. So this particular, for question 1, really, really important question, that's 20% of the marketing response, and that's the important thing. Down and down and down and down and down we go. Somewhere near the middle, possibly more likely near the bottom, is your service will be accessible. 2%, maybe. That 2% is not going to swing their procurement. But accessibility is an absolute requirement. Our public sector duties state that we must comply with the regulations, we must meet the standards, and we must ensure that we're not discriminating against citizens or colleagues. So that's an absolute thing, but in our requirements, it's a 2-3% thing. So it's not swinging enough. And that's another problem. And I think the consequences of this, and a lot of the other ones, is we get poorly understood requirements. We're kind of, as I said, we've got people who don't necessarily appreciate what they are asking for when they're saying we want it accessible, or what they are seeing when someone responds to that. We also get poorly scored responses because it's difficult to involve multiple specialists or specialists on one specific area within all of the procurement activities. So you need to try and train up, get people more aware of these things, but that comes with its own problems. We can lead to poor accessibility responses that are more successful because it's only 3% of the actual procurement activity. So what do we do with that? The other problem that we've got is we get this misplaced, and I've seen this a few times as well, we get this misplaced sense of security that we have actually done our due diligence. We've asked that it's going to be accessible. It's part of the procurement process. Therefore, whatever we get will be accessible. But that isn't true. All we're doing is we're kind of saying, well, it's in the requirement and that's all well and good. But the actual scoring was got trumped by something else, but got trumped by functional requirements or security requirements or whatever it was. So how do we deal with that misplaced sense of security? And I think one of the other ones is we're storing up liability arguments. Well, we're kind of putting out these things. We're saying you're agreeing that you're going to make it WCAG compliant, but we're not necessarily scrutinizing the responses well enough to be able to assure ourselves that when a supplier says we're going to make it accessible, we know that that's what they mean. We know that they're competent at being able to do that. So we have a challenge, because if at some point down the line they deliver something which is inaccessible, who takes the bill? Who deals with it? Who has to pay for it? Who has to fix it? You're in a potentially long-term relationship with a supplier that you don't necessarily want to sour by going, well, actually, you said you'd made it accessible. You've not. Deal with it. Get on with it. It's called a supplier relationship for a reason. It's a to and fro, and we need to kind of work back and forward with this. So it becomes all these big problems stored up for later. So some alternative approaches. Now, this is a bit of a work in progress. It's a bit of a kind of, I've found other things and conversations around about this, that kind of speak to this, but it doesn't address all the problems that we've got. These are huge problems, and I think not necessarily to disappoint people who say we're going to get this into procurement. That's not necessarily going to solve your problems. It's I had a good chat with our procurement, some of our procurement or my colleagues, and they were basically saying, well, there's a gazillion requirements in there that we have to put in because there's this bit of legislation or that bit of regulation or this or that requires us to put this in. Putting it in the procurement doesn't necessarily guarantee it's going to happen. It needs to be much more than that. So I think the first one, and this is a challenging one. I was chatting with some colleagues about this, and they were saying, well, actually, this is something that we have difficulty with because we don't necessarily know when we can do this. But it's about engaging with the suppliers, engaging with them as early as you possibly can. So this is going out to the market, getting them to help you write the tender effectively, being clear about what standards you're going to be looking at, so that you're upfront about, well, actually, this is what we want to do. We have to make it accessible, so that they are not coming in blind to this whole thing and not necessarily clear about what you want out of this. But also that engagement kind of gives you an opportunity to start finding out really where the accessibility maturity is within the marketplace. Because for some it's going to be quite good, for others maybe less so. Open to questions about scope and so forth before it's even defined, and terms and conditions. So again, you're being clear about the standards that you're talking about, you're being clear about what this is going to involve and how this might look, so that it's just about this whole thing about building stronger working relationships. If you go out to the whole market so that it's fair and open and transparent, I am assured that's something that we can do. But if you can start building that relationship, that puts you into a better position. And the better position is that you are then talking to them and going, well, okay, we know you've got problems. We know that it's not accessible. We know that you've not necessarily got all the skills, but we also know that you are making changes, and we can help you with that. We want to make things better because we need it to be better, and we're happy for you to benefit from us finding out what needs to be fixed, as long as you're willing to actually make the fixes. So that's a kind of big sort of shift in terms of how we engage with organizations. I think the other thing that we can kind of look at is moving away from the checkboxes. So the checkbox is roughly put, however you kind of dress up the actual non-functional requirement. Is it accessible? What are you going to do? Is it going to be accessible? There was a talk a couple of years back that was at, I think it was the University of Canterbury, and JISC had explored the idea of using more open questions within their procurement activities. And the big aim within this was, it wasn't necessarily to say, are you accessible? It was to ask, how do you think about accessibility? And the reason that that is more useful is because if you can get someone on board who sees accessibility as really important, who values accessibility, who is investing in accessibility, even if their product isn't as accessible as you might want now, chances are they're on a pathway to improve that accessibility. So you got much more nuanced results around about that. You were much better able to kind of understand where that organization was and whether or not you'd be able to work with them. So you got that more open and honest dialogue with suppliers. This does depend on route. So for example, when you're looking at software as a service, you're effectively buying an off-the-shelf product. Your opportunity to kind of engage with the supplier is quite limited. There is still some there. I've had instances where we've worked with a software as a service supplier on a number of different products, where we've gone, well, actually, that's the one that's got the functionality we need. We'll get it, and then start the conversation with the supplier and say, right, okay, we would like you to do these things to improve your service. That can work. So some of the sample questions that you might ask, I'm not going to go through all of these, but some of the sample questions. Please tell us a bit about any standards that the product or service has been designed to meet, providing evidence to support. So what we're interested in is, well, actually, what do you know about it? How do you kind of engage with this already? How do you ensure accessibility is effectively considered or integrated in your product or service design and development? Again, are people looking at engaging with disabled users and using their feedback and input in the design of their services? Are they kind of using consistent design patterns and standards? All of those sorts of things. So there's a variety of other questions that we can ask that start to probe a little bit more deeply. Now, again, you've still got the problem of this might be only 3% of your overall total, but it starts to tell you a lot more, and it also surfaces a lot more with the other people who might be scoring your tender. So the sort of outcomes that we've got so far, nothing definitive, I'm sad to say. We do tend to be having much more open discussions on how to make services more accessible. I think I mentioned at some point we've got a supplier framework for websites effectively, and website marketing websites and so forth. I've been able to have discussions with all of those suppliers and actually talk to them about what we are looking for. None of them are necessarily perfect, but they are all now aware of what we mean when we say accessible. They're aware of who to bring questions to. We're starting building up that better relationship. Again, this has required me to know, or we've had required somebody who knows what they're talking about to engage with these suppliers, and with having those suppliers on board with that discussion has been a key part to that. I think we're pushing at an open door in this at the moment, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. I've also, as I say, I've gone to software as a service suppliers and worked with them, and again, building up a conversation and working with them to improve what they supply and how they supply it. And this does, as I've put there, this can drive change in suppliers consider accessibility. It actually does. It changes how they are thinking about this stuff. Most suppliers I speak to want to do the right thing. They want to do it in the right way. They want to make sure the services that they're providing to the public sector are of a high quality. And from my perspective, certainly accessibility means high quality, because if it's not accessible, we ain't open to all citizens. So there's a lot of buy-in to the idea. You will potentially get pushback, and this is, I've seen this as well, and that's where you end up in difficult discussions about liability and all those sorts of things. Those are not easy. I haven't got an easy answer for those at all, but they can happen. So more questions I have as I go through all this. How might we better engage with suppliers at the appropriate stages? So more engagement, I think, is a big answer to that. And how do we have better conversations with suppliers? I can't be in every conversation. That's not realistic. We don't have specialists to be in every conversation. So what do I do to improve that? And the biggie is, how can we change our practices to handle standards compliance requirements? How do we handle a procurement which basically says accessibility? If they say no, we're not going to make it accessible, then it is immediately off the table. There's no two ways about that. Now, we would never go down that route yet, because it's not that way inclined. But for something like cybersecurity, we pretty much do go down that route. So how do we actually change it to handle standards compliance like in that horizontal way? And that's really, really difficult challenge, because we need good governance in our procurement process, and we need to make sure we're spending public money in a balanced way. And that's where I am at the moment. So happy to open it up to a few minutes of questions. Sorry, I thought I was going to be short there, Tony.
No, that's fine. I think it's really interesting to hear that story, and I know we touched on yesterday. It's something we're trying to do at Sense with some of our procurement. Couple of questions that have come in. So Stephen asks, who is responsible for getting accessibility into procurement? Is that procurement team? Is that legal team? Is it themselves as the accessibility expert? They're a web person, not a procurement person. And some kind of suggestions there about, do we need something like a procurement gateway document to deal with things and those elements? So if you want to pick up that one, and then I'll come on to another one.
So
around
the procurement
questions.
gateway document, that's an easy one. So for our SaaS, so software as a service products and cloud products, we've actually built up effectively a gateway document that we're looking at, and that includes issues like data protection, cybersecurity, and accessibility. So we've built that in there, and we're starting to, as we're looking at these products and looking at, well, how are we going to sort of bring on more cloud products, we've got this document or the process where we can effectively start going through top to bottom and start asking these questions. Again, we've got a challenge in terms of specialist knowledge. Who's responsible? That's a tricky one, because so in terms of your requirements, the procuring or the resource manager who is doing the procurement is the one that's responsible for the requirements. There will be some requirements depending on what you're actually procuring that the procurement team, sorry, this is how it works in Scottish Government as far as my hazy knowledge of procurement goes. The procurement team will have a series of standards and requirements that they need to apply depending on what you're procuring. So you could argue that procurement are responsible for putting it in because it is a regulatory requirement. But again, they don't necessarily have the knowledge of what it is and how to apply it and how to assess it. So it needs a sort of broader piece. The other thing is, in terms of the procurement relationship, you actually want the procuring team, so the buyer, to actually take responsibility as well, because whilst you might, and this is where we get to the problem of having that conversation, they might say, yes, it's going to be accessible. You get to the end point, it's not. The buyer needs to be in a position to know what they meant by that, how they're going to deal with that. So it's not just a case of ticking the box, which is the procurement side of things. It's a bit of needs to start with procurement, goes through the buyer. It's a broader issue.
Super, that's great, thanks. Nadir has asked, could we create a specialist pool that could be accessed? So maybe kind of trying to bring some of those skills together. Obviously, there are some practical challenges in that, but is that a potential solution we should explore?
Possibly. I mean, one thing I've thought about in the past is actually how, particularly around again about SaaS stuff. That's, in many respects, that's an easy one. It's how do we share things like if somebody has conducted an audit on whatever SaaS platform it is, I'm not going to name any, but we've conducted an audit. How do we share that so that we're aware of the pros and cons, and also how do we share that so that the supplier can start addressing some of those issues and be aware that those issues are something that we care about. In terms of pools of specialist resources, it is tricky. I think generally the specialist resources I know are up to their eyeballs in what they've got. So the practicalities are we haven't got enough of them. I think I came back to a comment earlier about we need to train more people to be aware of this thing, so that there is much more awareness of responsibilities within teams.
You know, one from me actually. I mean, in voluntary sector, we're not as tied into some of the procurement rules, which gives us both a degree of flexibility, but also we don't necessarily have the requirements as you do to have those things in place. We recently kind of threw a supplier out at the ITT stage because they declared they weren't accessible, and then they said, but we've got a really good product, why won't you look at it? You know, have you come across that experience, and is that something you would do? Would you encourage that kind of view?
So that isn't something within the procurement frameworks that we have that can be done, because you're looking at the ITT, all your responses, you're scoring up those responses, and then the person with the highest score and combined with the price, they're the ones that are going to win. So this is within public procurement and spending, the spending guidelines that we have. We have to be fair and transparent in that way. But yeah, at some point, we're going to have to look at some things. Again, it's security, data privacy and data protection, accessibility, stuff that cuts across, where you kind of go, well, if you don't have that, we really can't use your service at all. Don't care what your functionality is, we just can't use it. How do we look at those? That's and it's a problem that we're actively wrestling with, because we do need to be fair and transparent in our procurement activities, but we also need to ensure that we've got those cross-cutting, really important horizontals within the services and products that we're buying.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, really challenging. I think there's lots more to be done. Just seeing if we've got any other questions popped in. Yeah, a couple of points from Ange just about, you know, confirming things that they're applicable across the whole product, and you know, are kind of carried through, I think is a theme as well.
Yep.
So one we can pick up on.
Hi everyone, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tim Scallon and I'm profoundly deaf. I was born deaf because my mum had German measles while she was pregnant with me. I would like to share you a story. I want you to imagine that you have moved to Deafshire. Everybody in Deafshire uses sign language and communicates through sign language. They don't need English, whether it's written or spoken, and they use British Sign Language, BSL. It's a massive community, 150,000 deaf sign language users. It's a wonderful place, and that's the reason why you moved. It has such rich culture, visual comedy. People have passionate views and have wonderful facial expressions. We have wonderful art. So it's a really rich cultural environment. Now you're the only hearing person in that deaf share, and you have to rely on verbal cues and hearing things. And you're now the minority in deaf share. Televisions don't have speakers. There's no captions on the television because everybody uses sign language and it's a visual and they just need the screens. Phones don't have microphones or speakers, just cameras. And we contact each other through videos. You've learned a little bit of sign language, but obviously you're not proficient in it at all. So you're an observer and just watching everybody signing around you. On the television, the news is presented in sign language. They don't need to hear anything, but you notice that something's happened in Wuhan. There's a virus occurred, but it's a long way away because it's in China, so you don't need to worry about it. But you can see things happening around. You also see, again, the Chinese virus. Trump has made this word, but again, it's in another country, so you're not concerned. But when you go outside, you would see that everybody's wearing these clear masks. You don't even have a mask, and you end up being arrested for breaking lockdown rules. You're very shocked, you're concerned, you're thinking, what's going on? Because the local deaf council from the public health has signed to the community to say that everybody has to wear clear masks so that it's easy for people to see each other's lip patterns and able to lip read each other. You end up at the police station, arrested. Now the officer that comes to you is actually deaf himself and uses sign language. And he's trying to relay your rights to you. You get a couple of things, but you don't fully understand what's happening. Then you gesture to him and say, I want to contact my parents and tell them that I'm here in the station. Now you people that can hear, you're desperate. You need an interpreter that is able to interpret sign language into English. But there's only one in every 75 hearing people. There's none available. Maybe tomorrow somebody might come, or even maybe next week. So you end up staying in the station overnight. You're feeling very poorly now. You're starting to lose your taste and sense of smell. You're starting to sweat. And then you say to the policeman, you're not very well. So they organise a GP who's deaf and uses sign language. So you're like, oh, I need to explain this to him. So I think, all right, my friend who can sign a little bit can also speak. I'll try and get them to come and interpret for me, but they're not qualified either in the medical situation or mental health or in a police scenario. So I'm going to give you what it's like now for deaf people and what the problems are and all the barriers that these deaf people are having to face throughout the UK. And it's a really sad situation. Health appointments are a really difficult situation for deaf people, whether it's an emergency or a planned appointment. Usually in emergency, deaf people have to wait for hours for an interpreter to come, and sometimes they don't come at all. And then sometimes they've had to use their family members, even young children, to help explain to the doctors what's wrong with them. I may have to go back and ask for more help with the hospital or doctors, and I have tried to get there and have had problems booking an interpreter, and 5 times they have failed to turn up. In other situations, they've found an interpreter for me, and then the next minute, last minute, they let me down. I went to university. I did a degree in computers, and I really enjoyed that. Throughout the course, my marks were really good, a 2.1. And you've got to remember that English is not my first language, it's my second language. My first language is sign language. And you've got to appreciate that English and British Sign Language is not the same structurally, grammatically, it's not the same. So when I ended up in the exam, I know the questions, I knew how to answer them. But what happened, obviously the marker followed my written answers, which weren't in the same as English, and so my mark was dropped to a lower mark. The other thing at the moment that's happening, you know how the BBC are providing the MPs briefings? For you, it's fine because you can hear what's being said, but no interpreters are provided on the BBC One channel, so I have no idea what's going on. So you can imagine for me, when COVID happened, why were people having to wear masks? What was happening? Also about the vaccinations. You know, when you need to have a vaccination now, you have to phone to have the appointment. I cannot phone my GP and speak to them and make that appointment. Another problem is now that websites are written in English, or we have to correspond in emails, which is not accessible for deaf people, which is a barrier. There are no BSL translations there. And mind you, we have something that Mark will talk about later called Signly, which will help with that situation. Now, if I receive any documents, especially when I was younger, and it's important to remember, you know, the NHS is a national provider. If you send out letters to deaf people that you send out to other members of society, this is too complex for them to read. You know, at the end of a treatment, you usually get a summary of your illness or treatment. This is not accessible for deaf people, and sometimes deaf people have to turn to their children and say, could you translate this for me and tell me what's being said? And an example of one of these letters that was received by somebody I know, they said in the letter, it said their life expectancy was 6 months. So this is really awful for a child to have to relay to their parent. They're only 12. So we need to think about that as well. However, that's the negative things. Let's look about how we can solve this. We have an option of doing video calls remotely. Some of the websites you might find a icon or logo there that says BSL, etc. And that means that that deaf person can click onto that link and then be in contact with an interpreter who then can make the call to yourselves, your organisation, your work members, etc., whether that be hospital, government, education. So they can have a full conversation via VRS, Video Relay Service. So that's a lovely option. another option is to provide your employees or work colleagues with deaf awareness training. So you can talk about the difference between the different technology that's coming up. So like Signly, which Mark will explain later. So you'll get to know about that. Maybe providing basic taster sign language classes. These only take a few weeks. Again, your letters, your websites, any written comments or content could be changed into BSL, and that's, well, Mark will talk about that later. And I recommend, if you're going to use agencies to book interpreters, I think you need to think about using a couple of agencies so they can resource those interpreters easily. As I said before, I've been let down many times by certain agencies and not booking me interpreters, but another agency has provided it. So have a couple of options there to book interpreters. Be aware that there are apps on mobile devices where people can click onto that app, which will then link to an interpreter. So those are the couple of solutions that you could take away with you today. Just to be aware, not all deaf people understand written English. Please remember, when they leave school at 16, a large majority have the reading age of an 8-year-old. And another fact, just to make you be aware and go away with, and it's really important, BSL is not the same as written English or spoken English. So as I said before, the syntax, the grammar is completely different to English. However, sign language is a rich language. So I'm going to ask you to think about, where are the interpreters? Where are the translators? And where are the BSL websites? And by all means, please, you can always contact me. My name is Tim Scallion, and thank you very much for watching. And I'm going to hand over to Mark to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Absolutely awesome. I'm ashamed to say that 5 years ago, I knew very little of what Tim was talking about. I wasn't deaf aware at all. I was working in digital, supporting retail. But my agency was lucky enough to support a deaf charity, DeafAx, and it was those guys that helped articulate some of the things that Tim talked about, what it is to identify as deaf with a big D, to be really proud of deaf culture. Not to see yourself as disabled, but rather to be really proud of your heritage, your history, your language. And I asked Tim, how's it taken me so long to figure this out? Why has no one ever told me before? And Tim explained that one of the reasons he thinks is that it's so hard for deaf people to complain. If the nature of your complaint is about bad communication, then how are you supposed to register that? And I suppose that goes some way towards explaining why perhaps many organisations and corporates aren't as deaf aware as they could be. In my work with the deaf charity, we had a series of happy accidents. We did a kind of volunteer project where we added sign language, pre-recorded sign language to leaflets. I don't know if this will demo very well, but just held up your phone and got pre-recorded sign language over the top. This kind of thing that we were doing in our spare time was deployed as a little test in Roald Dahl Museum for their deaf schools that used to visit. And everyone loved it. And that weekend, BBC News pick up on the press release. And this thing that we've created in our spare time is on BBC News for 6 minutes on Saturday and 6 minutes on Sunday. And my mum is phoning up going, is this something to do with you? And it's quite hard to explain how it all happened so suddenly. On Monday, Lloyds Bank phone and say, can we show this to our deaf customers? The reaction was we had the sort of full might of corporate support from Lloyds, a customer lab and researchers, and they did a deaf user group and got everybody together. And the deaf customers loved it. I think we did a mortgage leaflet to kick off, but the leaflet said go online for more information. And there was even more English, it was even more complicated. And so the deaf users there just said, well, look, I like the idea, but couldn't you just port it so that there's sign language at source on the website? A bit like a screen reader for blind and low vision users. And so Lloyds literally turned to me in the meeting and said, in focus group, and said, do you think you can add sign language to the website? And I said, yes, I think I probably know how. So I quit my day job. We made our first hire, Alex, our engineer, the clever one that actually does the coding. And we launched on Lloyd's website in January last year. In the 16 weeks prior to COVID, a team of very part-time deaf translators translated the equivalent of 35% of War and Peace. Huge volumes of sign language content on Lloyd's site. The top 100 journeys were signed to start, but if a user visits a page where the content hasn't been signed, you can click request BSL, and then Signly literally grabs that English from the website, fires it straight across to the teleprompter for the deaf translator to return a BSL version, and then that is ready for everybody to view. And it's really, really quick and really easy. We started off working with ITV to get the sign language content translated, which was brilliant. But it was a big team. There was a camera person and an editor, and then the translator, an interpreter, a runner. So now Signly Studio, one translator working from home can return about 5 times more content, which has been great in COVID because they can homework. So I'll give you a quick demo if Tech Guy can screen share. I think that's the right one. Can you see that? Oh, now you've all disappeared. Totally disappeared. Well, hopefully you can see it. So like I said, screen reader really for sign language users. So it's not like going off to a YouTube page to watch a whole 4 minutes of what this page is about. We can view the sign language in vision, real people, highly qualified deaf translators. Just scrub around the site and view the bits we're interested in. And if even one character changes on the site, the technology knows, pulls down that paragraph, the rest of it will still be visible. And then we return a new version. We're currently recording 3 times a week, but as Tim said, it's better than waiting for an interpreter. And the deaf user can independently self-serve to inform themselves. It's not like it replaces interpreters, but rather it augments that provision, because you can read up on whatever it is, COVID, and that preserves the interpreting resource for the really sort of high value stuff like attending an important medical appointment. For some reason, all the buttons have disappeared on Teams. Let's try. Hopefully. Am I back? Yes, good. So that's it. That's Signly. In service with Lloyds Bank. Lloyds is probably one of the world's most deaf-friendly websites, and they've achieved that in 4 months. So not bad going. Tim and I'd be really happy to answer any questions that you've got right now. I think we've got 5 minutes left, or pick up afterwards. Thanks for listening.
Mark, Tim, a huge thank you, not just from me, I think from everyone on this session. I'm just having a look to see if there is any questions in there for you guys. I can't see anything at the minute, but I think that, for me, watching that, Tim, so many, and I've put it in that chat, so many thoughts, emotions run through your mind, because not everybody thinks and sees that examples. And I think it's fantastic that you've been able to share that with us. And I'll just pause for a minute there and see if anybody's got any questions that you would like to ask Tim and Mark.
I think just while we wait for questions, Dave, I suppose the challenge has been for Tim and I to find people that are really going to be ambassadors and are going to try and push through being more deaf friendly almost at any cost. To succeed at Lloyds, we've needed a number of key players that have really invested in the idea and are just not going to take no for an answer. And there's been 2 or 3 of those. So yeah, if there's anybody in the audience that is passionate enough about this topic to actually want to make a difference, then yeah, please do chat to us afterwards. We'd love to hear from you.
So Tim's just got a comment as well. Just to let everybody know, I received some news recently. There was 2 things on there. So one of them was about the impact of coronavirus. So things like the triage test that they do when you go to like a medical institute. And they were actually trying to ask my 7-year-old daughter to relay those questions to me, and I insisted that they wait and find a qualified interpreter. And it means like, oh, maybe we can write something down. So yeah, that was an issue that I spotted. And then obviously when clinics refusing to provide BSL interpreters at all. And their comments saying, oh, sorry, we don't have the budget for that. And but we do know that there is a large budget for communication within medical settings. And then obviously the processes for making those complaints and requesting to book an interpreter. I mean, they have their own information accessibility protocol for the NHS. And that is still not being followed, which then means that deaf people are being left behind with things like health inequality.
Tim, there's a question in the chat which perhaps you could field. Paul asks about regional variation. So obviously we're using registered sign language translators. There's 23 of those just in the country for background. Do you think regional variation in sign language means that some parts of what we're translating is harder to understand? Or in other words, how does the deaf community cope with regional variation in sign? That's a better question, I think.
So for me, I'm actually in the Birmingham area. And it might be the same as people who use spoken English. They have different accents and slightly different terms. So it's the same for British Sign Language, and there's just small variations. So things like these are 3 different signs for morning for different areas, and they are very, very slightly different, but it's very, very simple to learn. And once you've gone through and become a fluent signer, and certainly once you've got to the stage of becoming an interpreter and you're qualified and you've gone through all of your training. I mean, at the moment, I think there's somewhere in the region of 1,100 qualified interpreters, and I think there's about 12 deaf relay interpreters. And it's really difficult to receive formal education around those things, around regional variations.
I think just while you're talking about interpreters, Tim, I mean, you did make it in your sort of analogy at the top of the story about what it would be like to be a hearing person in a deaf world. But the ratio of interpreters to deaf people is approximately 1 to 75. So 1 interpreter for every 75 deaf people. So getting hold of an interpreter is difficult, and in a crisis, it can be impossible. And Tim's story sort of brought that to life. A medical emergency, those kind of things, it is a real problem. So I think what we need to think about is how do we make access to sign language part of the mainstream. We've kind of done it with screen readers for blind and low vision people. The technology is now there to do it for deaf sign language users.
So yeah, Mark, I think, yeah, that's a really good point about looking for interpreters. So things like being able to have information available in BSL on websites, or having interpreters who were based somewhere where they can do remote and perhaps utilize them to serve many customers in the day. Medical information can be exceptionally complex. I remember receiving something that was like, it was 16 pages of information, and there was no visual aids on there. There was nothing at all visual. It certainly wasn't in BSL, and I could not completely understand it. And actually my illness got worse because I was getting then stressed and anxious because I couldn't understand the information. We need medical information to be accessible and inclusive for all. I mean, my wife is she isn't deaf, so she hears, but she's learned to sign, and you mean even if you're only learning the basics, it's something.
I'm conscious of time, Dave. Do you want us to wrap now?
Yes, if you could, is there anything final from yourself, Mark, or Tim, that you would like to add? And then Lauren will be putting the link in at the side for us to go back to the main session. But from me, a huge thank you to you both. I think that's been really, really useful.
Thank you for listening. Really appreciate you hosting us.
I'm just checking if there's any last questions. There's a couple of thanks in there. I think everyone just echoing the same thing. So thank you very much to Mark, Tim, and if you want to put we've got your details, so we'll happily share, and if people want to get in touch, they can do, if that's okay.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks to the interpreters as well.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye.
So we come to the end of our conference now, and just to spend a few minutes just kind of summing up from today and over the last 2 days. I think we've heard about, particularly today, some of the solutions that we can use to address the challenges around accessibility, whether that's fixing issues on our websites or documents we publish. That's a debate I think will go on for a long time, or even as we've just heard from Kevin, selecting applications in the right way and making sure they're suitable for individuals in our organisations or the people we serve. And we've had lots of active conversation and sharing of personal experiences and ideas. And I know we haven't been able to get to everything. Apologies for those of you that we haven't. But it's been really good to see all that conversation going on and sharing of experiences. I'd like to obviously thank everybody for their input and participation. Special thanks to our partner organisations who've taken part and supported the event. And if we could have I think a very big virtual thanks as well to the Socitm events team who've pulled everything together and kept speakers on board and made sure the event runs smoothly. There is always a lot of work that goes in the background to these, and people who who aren't on screen need our thanks as well. So a big round of applause to them. And so kind of as we there we go, we get a big thanks from double hands. So sort of as we conclude, I wanted to just reflect on the intentions of the last 2 days. Our theme has been about compliance to confidence and how we can move from the minimum needs of the legislation to how accessibility should be a central part of everything we do. Making sure it is accessibility by default, not by exception. We've heard about the leadership challenges in understanding why accessibility is important, the practical challenges around tools and technology, or simply having the time to do the work in amongst everything else we've got to deal with, which we can't ignore. I don't think any of those diminish from the fact that we have a responsibility to move this forward. It's going to require us to be open to that constructive feedback about the challenges individuals face in accessing our services, but also how we can and perhaps should be using our positions as customers ourselves and the relationships we have with suppliers to get them to build more accessible solutions for us. I'm somebody who's worked in the charity sector for almost 20 years, and it's always been really inspiring to see how passionate everyone is and wants to do more for individuals that we look after or the communities that we serve. And I think I've seen that same passion across the last few days around accessibility and how inspired everyone is around this topic. you know, I'm certainly going to come away knowing that whilst there's more to do, I'm really enthused by the last 2 days. I'm fairly more confident in, you know, what we need to look at and how we can move forward with that. So that really, I think, concludes our session. Just to thank you once again, everybody, for your time and input. Please do complete the feedback form that's going to appear as if by magic, as I say it. There's also an accessibility section on the Socitm resource hub. The link was posted earlier on by Martin, if we can perhaps get that in again in a minute. And I know that the videos, the recordings from the last 2 days, and as many of the presentations as we can will be available on the website shortly. So thank you ever so much. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care. Goodbye.